you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath, relax, and let the story begin. Welcome to Cora Stories Live. Tonight, settle in, get comfortable, and make yourself at home. Whether you are listening from morning light, late evening, or somewhere deep in the quiet hours of night, I am grateful you are here. In the comments, tell us where you are listening from tonight. City, state, or country. I would love to know where this story is finding you. Now take a breath.
My mother taught me how to cook before I was 12. Not because she expected me to become a chef, because she believed every woman should know how to feed the people she loved. She taught me how to sew a loose button, how to stretch a grocery budget, how to calm a crying child, how to clean a house after a long day at work, how to keep going when nobody noticed how tired I was. My brother sat at the same table every night. He listened to the same conversations. He watched the same lessons. He heard every piece of advice. But somehow, none of it was meant for him. Nobody planned it that way. Nobody even noticed it happening, not then. 30 years later, one of us was holding a marriage together, and the other was watching one fall apart. The hardest part was, neither of us understood why. Not at first, because sometimes the lessons that shape our lives are not the ones we are taught. Sometimes they are the ones nobody thinks to teach. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you are watching from today. Whether it is early morning, the middle of a busy day, or late at night when the world has finally gone quiet, I would love to know. I read every comment, and I am always grateful for the time you spend here with me. And if there is a lesson you wish someone had taught you when you were younger, leave the word lesson in the comments. Because this story is not about blaming mothers. It is not about blaming fathers. And it is not about blaming sons. This is a story about love. The kind of love that does its best and still gets things wrong. The kind of love that prepares one child for responsibility while quietly protecting another from it. The kind of love that discovers its mistakes years later, when the consequences are already living inside the people it was trying to protect. My name is Grace Carter. For most of my life, I believed my brother Daniel and I had been raised exactly the same. We ate at the same table, went to the same schools, lived under the same roof, shared the same parents, shared the same rules, or at least that is what I thought. It was not until we became adults, not until marriages and children and real life arrived, that I began to see the difference. And by then, the difference was costing someone everything. This story begins in a small yellow house on Maple Street, a house filled with laughter, a house filled with love, a house where nobody realized they were teaching two children two completely different lessons, and where one sentence, spoken hundreds of times over the years, would quietly follow us into adulthood. The sentence was simple. He is a boy. At the time, it sounded harmless. Looking back, it changed everything. The first time I noticed the difference, I was 9 years old. Not because someone pointed it out, not because my parents announced it. The difference lived in ordinary moments. The kind of moments nobody remembers until years later. Saturday mornings were chore mornings in our house. Mom believed everyone should contribute. At least that was what she said. Every Saturday she would stand in the kitchen holding a yellow notepad. The same yellow notepad. The same blue pen, the same careful handwriting. Grace. She would tear off a piece of paper and hand it to me. Dust the living room, fold laundry, sweep the hallway, help prepare lunch, clean the bathroom sink. Nothing unreasonable. Just household responsibilities. I usually nodded and got started. Then I would look around for Daniel. My younger brother would already be halfway out the front door. Basketball under one arm, friends waiting outside, adventure waiting somewhere beyond our neighborhood. One Saturday I finally asked Mom, "Yes, what's Daniel doing today?" She looked up from the kitchen counter. Playing with his friends, I glanced at the list in my hand. "What chores does he have?" Mom smiled. "He mowed the lawn last week." I looked out the window. The lawn had been mowed 10 days earlier. Even at 9 years old, something about that answer felt strange. But I shrugged and went back to work. Because children rarely question the systems they grow up inside. They assume normal is normal. The lessons that shape us are usually invisible while they are happening. Looking back now, I realize Mom never intended to be unfair. In her mind, she was preparing me for adulthood, preparing me for life, preparing me for things she believed women needed to know. The problem was not what she taught me. The problem was what she never taught Daniel. Years passed. The differences became easier to see. When I turned 12, Mom began teaching me how to cook, not fancy meals. Real meals, family meals. The kind that keep people together after difficult days. The kind that make children feel safe. One evening she stood beside me while I carefully chopped vegetables. "Slow down," she said. "The food is not running away." I laughed. The knife nearly slipped. She gently adjusted my grip. "Cooking isn't just feeding people, Grace." "What is it then?" she smiled. "It is one way of loving them." I never forgot that. Meanwhile, Daniel was in the living room playing video games. Not because he was forbidden from learning. Nobody ever said that. Nobody simply invited him. Nobody expected him to learn. And expectations are powerful things. Children become what the people around them expect them to become. One night, Daniel wandered into the kitchen. He was 14. I was 16. Mom and I were making dinner. The smell of garlic and onions filled the room. Daniel opened the refrigerator. "How much longer?" 20 minutes, Mom said. He groaned dramatically. "I am starving," Mom laughed. "You will survive." He grabbed a soda, then looked at the cutting board. "Looks complicated," Mom smiled. "Good thing your sister knows how," Daniel grinned. "I would probably burn the house down." Looking back, I have learned that the most powerful lessons are rarely spoken seriously. They arrive disguised as jokes. Repeated often enough, a joke eventually stops being funny. It becomes a belief. Everybody laughed. Even me. Mom waved him away. "Go relax." Daniel disappeared back into the living room. At the time, it felt harmless. A family joke. A passing moment. But looking back now, I wonder how many lives are shaped by the things we laugh about repeatedly. Because every joke carries a message, and every repeated message eventually becomes belief. The older we became, the more obvious it got. When relatives visited for holidays, the women gathered in the kitchen. The men gathered around football games. The women cooked. The men watched television. The women cleaned afterward. The men discussed sports. Nobody announced the rules. The rules simply existed, passed quietly from one generation to another. Like an heirloom nobody remembers receiving. One Thanksgiving I was 17. Daniel was 15. The kitchen was crowded, aunts, grandmothers, cousins, everyone moving around each other while preparing dinner. I noticed Daniel sitting comfortably in the living room, watching football with the men, laughing, relaxing. I walked over and handed him a bowl of potatoes. "Take these into the kitchen," he stared at me. "Why?" "Because Grandma needs them." He looked genuinely confused. "Can't somebody else do it?" I stared at him. For a moment I did not know what to say. Not because he was refusing, because he honestly had no idea why anyone would expect him to help. The thought had never crossed his mind, and suddenly I realized something. Daniel was not avoiding responsibility. Children rarely become what we tell them to become. They become what we repeatedly excuse. And sometimes the things we excuse out of love become the very things that hurt them later. He was growing up in a world that rarely handed him any. From the outside, the result can look the same. It is not. One creates selfishness, the other creates dependence. Neither is healthy, but only one feels invisible while it is happening. Years later, Mom would sit in her living room and cry over that truth, not because she had failed to love her son, because she loved him so much, and because love sometimes protects children from the very lessons they desperately need. At 18, I left for college. At 16, Daniel got his driver's license. Mom cried when I moved out. She hugged me tightly. "You'll do fine," I smiled. "How do you know?" She brushed hair from my face. "Because you know how to take care of yourself." At the time, those words sounded like encouragement. Now I hear something else. She was right. I did know how to take care of myself. The question nobody thought to ask was this: would Daniel know how to take care of himself too? Or had we spent years assuming somebody else would do it for him? Back then, nobody knew the answer, because nobody thought of that question, not Mom, not Dad, not Daniel, not even me. But life was already preparing to reveal it, and life has a way of exposing lessons that childhood manages to hide, especially inside marriage. especially inside parenthood, especially when love finally asks someone to carry weight they were never taught to lift. Life scattered us the way it scatters most families, not all at once. Little by little, a graduation, a new job, a wedding, a move across town. Then suddenly, one day you look around and realize the children who once shared a hallway now live entirely different lives. By 28, I was married to Ethan Carter. By 25, Daniel had married Maya. Mom could not have been happier. 2 weddings, 2 growing families, 2 homes filled with possibility. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The trouble with appearances is that they often arrive long before truth, and truth is patient. Truth will sit quietly in the corner for years. Then one day, it will stand up and introduce itself. Ethan and I started with almost nothing. A tiny apartment, second-hand furniture, a kitchen table that wobbled every time somebody touched it. The first night we moved in, we sat on the floor eating takeout because our chairs had not arrived yet. Ethan looked around the apartment. Then he laughed. "What?" He pointed at the empty room. "We are either starting a marriage or being held hostage." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my food. That became our first memory. Not perfection, not romance. Partnership. When the dishes needed washing, we washed them. When bills arrived, we paid them together. When one of us was exhausted, the other stepped in. Not because we had a perfect marriage, because we understood something important. A family is not carried by the strongest person. It survives because nobody lets one person carry everything. Meanwhile, Daniel and Maya bought a beautiful little house. 3 bedrooms, large backyard, white fence. The kind of home people point to and say, they have it all together. And for a while, maybe they did. At least from a distance. The first crack appeared after Noah arrived. One afternoon, about 6 months later, I stopped by unexpectedly. The front door was unlocked. A rare occurrence for Maya. She was usually meticulous about things like that. I stepped inside. The house was quiet, not peaceful. The kind of quiet that happens when exhaustion has finally outrun noise. Noah was asleep in a swing near the living room window. Tiny fingers curled into little fists, tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Beautiful, safe content. Maya sat at the dining table, motionless. For a moment I thought she was reading, then I realized she was staring at the same page. Not reading, just staring. A half-empty cup of coffee sat beside her. Cold, long forgotten. "Hey," she jumped slightly, then forced a smile. "Grace, are you okay?" Of course. The answer came too quickly. I sat down across from her. The dark circles beneath her eyes looked deeper than I remembered. Motherhood was hard. Everybody knew that. But something about Maya felt different. Not overwhelmed, drained. Like someone running on fumes, I glanced toward Noah. "How long has he been asleep?" She blinked. Then looked at the baby. "I don't know." That answer scared me. Not because she was careless, because Maya knew everything. Appointment dates, shopping lists, birthdays, deadlines. She always knew. The fact that she did not know how long her son had been asleep told me more than any conversation could. A gust of wind rattled the window. Maya rubbed her eyes, then quietly said, "Sometimes I feel like my brain never turns off." I waited. She looked embarrassed, as though admitting it made her weak. It just keeps running. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table. Doctor appointments. Diapers, formula, groceries, laundry, insurance, bills, vaccinations. She laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because some people laugh when they are too tired to cry. I wake up thinking about things. She looked down. I go to sleep thinking about things. Then she whispered, "And if I forget something?" Her voice cracked. It feels like the whole house falls apart. The room became quiet. Again outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the street. Inside, a woman sat carrying an invisible weight nobody could see. There is a particular kind of loneliness that arrives when everybody appreciates your work, but nobody realizes they cannot function without it. The world praises strong women. What it rarely asks is whether they are tired of being strong. 2 years later, Daniel and Maya welcomed a daughter, Lily, from the beginning. Noah adored her. He followed her everywhere, protected her fiercely, and proudly announced to anyone who would listen that he was a big brother. For a while, life seemed good. Busy, exhausting, but good. The kind of family everyone assumed was doing just fine. I remember visiting them one Saturday afternoon. Maya looked exhausted, not ordinary tired. Bone-deep tired, the kind that settles behind your eyes, the kind that sleep cannot fix. Noah was crying. Across the room, Lily slept in a rocker near the window. Laundry covered the couch. Dishes filled the sink. Toys covered the floor. Daniel sat in the recliner watching television. Not because he was cruel, not because he did not love his wife, because he genuinely did not see what Maya was carrying. That is the danger of invisible labor. The people carrying it feel crushed. The people not carrying it often do not even realize it exists. Maya bounced Noah against her shoulder. Every few seconds, her eyes drifted toward Lily's rocker, checking on her without even realizing she was doing it. She looked toward Daniel, waiting. Just for a second, as though hoping he might notice what she was carrying. He never looked up. A few weeks before that visit, Maya hosted a small family barbecue, nothing fancy, just burgers, hot dogs. Children ran around the backyard. Noah raced across the grass with his cousins while Lily rested on Maya's hip, watching the older children with wide, curious eyes. The kind of gathering families have every summer. At one point, Daniel walked over holding his phone. "Hey, Maya," she was carrying Lily while helping guests. "Yeah. Do we have any more paper plates?" Maya immediately answered, "Top pantry shelf." He nodded, then stopped. "Which cabinet?" Without hesitation, Maya pointed. "The one beside the refrigerator." Daniel disappeared. 30 seconds later, he returned. "I don't see them." Maya shifted Lily to her other shoulder, walked into the kitchen, reached above his head, pulled down a brand new package, exactly where she said it would be. Nobody thought much of it. Everyone laughed. The barbecue continued. But later that night, I found myself thinking about it. Not because Daniel could not find paper plates, because he never expected to. Somewhere along the way, Maya had become the keeper of every answer, and Daniel had become comfortable asking. The pattern appeared again a few minutes later, not dramatic. Not important enough to start an argument, just another tiny moment in a very long chain of them. Maya asked a simple question, the kind that should have required a simple answer and quick action. "Can you grab her bottle?" Daniel glanced up. "Where is it?" "In the kitchen." "Which cabinet?" "The same cabinet it has always been in." Daniel stood. "Opened the wrong cabinet." Then another. Then another. "Maya." She closed her eyes, not angrily, not dramatically, just tired, so tired. I watched her walk past him, open the correct cabinet, grab the bottle, prepare it herself, then return to the baby. The entire exchange lasted less than a minute. Most people would not have noticed it. I did, because I suddenly remembered all those Saturdays, all those kitchens, all those lessons. A strange thought crossed my mind. Daniel was 30 years old, and he still expected someone else to know where everything was. That thought stayed with me long after I left. Months later, Maya called me. She rarely called. Not because we were not close, because she was always busy. That evening her voice sounded different. Fragile. Like someone trying very hard not to break. "Grace, hey, do you have a minute?" I sat down immediately. Something felt wrong. Of course. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she finally spoke. "I am tired." My grip tightened around the phone. "I know. No," she whispered. "You don't." The silence that followed felt heavy. the kind of silence people carry when they have repeated the same pain to themselves for years. Eventually, she continued, "I feel like I am raising the children alone." My chest tightened. "Does Daniel help?" She laughed. A sad laugh, the kind that hurts more than crying. "He helps when I ask." I frowned. "That sounds good, Grace." Her voice cracked. "I do not want another child." The words landed like a stone. Then she said something I would never forget. "I want a partner." The most dangerous loneliness is not being alone. It is carrying a life built for two people and realizing only one person is holding it up. I sat there staring at the wall because suddenly everything made sense. Daniel was not refusing responsibility. He was waiting for instructions, waiting to be told, waiting to be directed, waiting for someone else to carry the mental load, the same way he always had. And Maya was drowning underneath it. There is a kind of loneliness that exists inside crowded rooms. A loneliness that arrives when someone says they love you, but still leaves you carrying everything alone. A marriage can survive hardship. It can survive debt. It can survive sickness. It can survive disappointment. What it struggles to survive is chronic imbalance, because eventually one person becomes tired of carrying what was meant for two. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Maya, about Daniel, about Mom, about all those years. Then an old memory surfaced. I was 13. Daniel was 11. Mom asked me to help fold laundry. I remember complaining. I remember rolling my eyes. I remember saying, "Why do I always have to help?" Mom had smiled and answered, "One day you'll thank me." At the time, I thought she was right. Now, I wondered if she had only finished half the lesson, because preparing daughters for life is important. But what happens when sons are not prepared too? A bird cannot fly with one wing. A marriage cannot stand on one pair of shoulders and love. Love eventually grows tired of dragging what partnership should be carrying. Weeks passed. Then months. The tension inside Daniel and Maya's house grew quietly. No screaming, no dramatic scenes, no broken dishes. Just disappointment, collecting itself one day at a time. Sometimes marriages do not collapse from explosions. Sometimes they erode, like water against stone. One unnoticed drop, then another, until one day the stone is no longer the same shape it used to be, and nobody remembers exactly when the damage began. The first person to finally notice something was wrong was Mom, and once she saw it, she could never unsee it, because there are truths that arrive like whispers, and there are truths that arrive like mirrors. The whisper can be ignored. The mirror cannot, and a mirror was about to be placed directly in front of Eleanor Brooks. The first sign that something had changed was not an argument. It was an invitation. About a week after the barbecue, Mom and I attended a church luncheon together. Nothing unusual, just one of those community gatherings where people eat too much food and tell the same stories they have been telling for 20 years. The room buzzed with conversation. Coffee cups clinked. Children wandered between tables. At one point, Mom excused herself to help in the kitchen. I followed. Old habits. Inside, 6 women worked around each other effortlessly, carrying trays, washing dishes, refilling drinks. Meanwhile, through the doorway, we could see the men sitting comfortably in the fellowship hall, talking, laughing, relaxing. Nobody seemed upset. Nobody seemed offended. Nobody appeared mistreated. And yet something about the scene suddenly felt familiar. Mom noticed me looking, then smiled. Some things never change. I smiled back, but neither of us sounded completely convinced. A few minutes later, an elderly woman named Margaret walked into the kitchen, widowed 82, sharp as ever. She glanced through the doorway, then chuckled. "The men still haven't found this room." "I see." The women laughed. Mom laughed too. Margaret shook her head. "I spent 47 years married." More laughter. Then she added, "I loved that man dearly. She pointed toward the fellowship hall, but if I disappeared for 2 weeks, he would have starved to death standing in front of a full refrigerator. The room erupted. Everybody laughed. Even Margaret. Even Mom. Even me. But something felt different this time. The laughter lingered a little too long, like people laughing at something they had never really questioned before. Margaret eventually walked away. The conversation moved on, yet Mom grew unusually quiet, and for the first time, I think she started seeing the pattern outside her own family. Mom called me on a Tuesday evening. Eleanor Brooks was not the type of woman who called simply to chat. If Mom called unexpectedly, there was usually a reason. Grace? Hey Mom, are you busy Saturday? I looked across the room. Ethan was helping our youngest daughter with a school project. Colored paper covered half the dining table. Glue sticks were everywhere. I don't think so. Why? Mom hesitated. Just for a second, I was thinking about visiting Daniel and Maya. Something in her voice made me pay attention. Okay, I wondered if you wanted to come. That was unusual. Mom rarely invited herself to her children's homes, and she almost never asked me to come along. Sure, she exhaled, as if relieved. Good. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Ethan looked up. What was that about? I shrugged. No idea, but something inside me already knew. Mothers notice things. Not always immediately, not always accurately, but eventually they notice. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that makes people stay inside longer than they intended. Mom and I drove together. For most of the trip she talked about ordinary things. The church bake sale, her neighbor's new dog, a recipe she wanted to try. The conversation felt forced, like someone rearranging furniture to avoid looking at a crack in the wall. Finally I asked, what's really going on? Mom stared through the windshield. Nothing. Then she said, have you noticed anything different about Maya lately? There it was. The real reason. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, maybe. Mom nodded slowly. She looks tired. I said nothing. Very tired, still nothing. Mom's hands tightened around her purse. I thought it was just the children. I glanced at her. And now, she looked down. I am not sure. The rest of the drive passed quietly. By the time we reached Daniel's house, I could feel tension sitting between us. Not conflict awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable, especially when it arrives carrying questions. Daniel greeted us at the door, smiling, relaxed. Happy to see us, the same Daniel he had always been. Kind, friendly, easygoing. The problem was never Daniel's heart. The problem was what life had never asked him to carry. Inside, the house looked beautiful, clean, organized, comfortable. Maya had always been gifted that way. She could make any space feel welcoming. But as the afternoon unfolded, small things began revealing themselves. The way cracks reveal themselves after rain. One at a time, Noah was 7 now. Lily was 5. Both energetic. Both wonderful. Both moving at the speed children seemed determined to maintain. Maya moved constantly, refilling drinks, serving snacks, answering questions, cleaning spills, helping Lily find a missing shoe, helping Noah with homework, packing soccer equipment for later, all while carrying on conversations. Daniel helped too sometimes, when asked. That distinction kept catching my attention. Maya asked, Daniel responded. Maya remembered, Daniel followed. Maya planned, Daniel participated. At first glance, the difference seemed small. By the 100th repetition, it felt enormous. The moment Mom noticed happened just after lunch. Noah had finished eating. His plate sat on the table, half-full glass beside it, crumbs everywhere. Noah stood, started walking away. Maya spoke immediately. Noah? He stopped, turned. Yes, Mom. What are you forgetting? He looked around, confused. My plate! Yes. He sighed dramatically, the way children do when they believe the world is being unfair. Then something happened, something tiny, something devastating. Noah pointed toward Lily. Why can't she do it? The room became quiet. not because of the question, because of what came next. Noah shrugged. The certainty in his voice was what made it so unsettling. Girls do that stuff. The words floated through the room. Simple, casual, ordinary, the kind of sentence people say without thinking. Mom froze. I saw it happen. Her entire expression changed. Noah did not notice. Neither did Lily. Daniel barely looked up, but Mom noticed, because she had heard those words before. Not those exact words. The same idea, the same belief, the same assumption, different generation. Same lesson. Noah grabbed his plate and carried it into the kitchen. The conversation moved on. Children laughed. People smiled. Lunch continued, but Mom sat unusually still. Her eyes followed Noah, then Daniel, then Maya, then back to Noah, as though she were watching 30 years collapse into a single moment. The frightening thing about cycles is that they rarely announce themselves. They simply appear one day in the voice of a child. It was not the first time Mom had heard something like that. And this time, she could not look away, because the mirror was no longer showing Daniel. The mirror was showing the future, as though determined to prove the point. Life offered another example only minutes later. At one point, Maya stepped away to answer a phone call from Noah's school. While she was talking, Lily spilled juice across the table. The children immediately called for Maya. Not Daniel, not Grandma, not anybody else. Maya. Instinctively, automatically, as though everyone in the room knew she was responsible for solving problems. Daniel started toward the table, then stopped. Looking uncertain, Maya ended the phone call, grabbed paper towels, handled the spill, answered a question from Noah, signed a school form, then returned to the original conversation she had been having before any of it happened, without missing a beat. Mom watched the entire sequence, said nothing, but her expression changed, because for the first time she was not seeing competence, she was seeing weight. And competence becomes a burden when everybody assumes it can carry unlimited amounts. The afternoon continued. Lunch ended. The children drifted back outside. Conversations resumed, but Mom seemed unusually quiet. That afternoon, while the children played outside, Mom volunteered to help Maya clean the kitchen. I joined them for several minutes. Nobody spoke. Water ran. Plates clinked. Cabinets opened and closed. Then Mom finally asked, "Are you happy?" The question landed heavily. Maya stopped wiping the counter. For a moment, she simply stood there, holding the cloth, staring at nothing. The silence lasted so long that I almost interrupted. Then Maya smiled. A small smile, the kind people use when they are trying not to tell the truth. "I have a good life." Mom looked at her carefully. That was not an answer, and nobody in that kitchen believed it. A few seconds later, Maya added, "I am just tired." Mom nodded. Tired from what? The question was gentle, no accusation, no judgment, just concern, and somehow that made it harder, because concern creates openings. Openings let truth escape. Maya lowered her eyes. Then she whispered, "Everything." The word barely reached us, everything. One word, 1,000 responsibilities. School forms. Doctor appointments. Laundry, meals, schedules, homework, birthdays, shopping, cleaning, planning, remembering, managing, everything. The word hung in the air. Mom slowly sat down at the kitchen table. I had seen my mother angry. I had seen her sad. I had seen her frightened. I had never seen her look like this, like someone discovering a debt she did not realize had been accumulating for decades. Because some mistakes do not arrive with sirens, they arrive with understanding, and understanding can be far more painful. A broken window can be repaired. A misunderstanding can be corrected, but understanding forces you to revisit every moment that led there. That evening, after we left, Mom was unusually quiet. The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights slid across the windshield. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, I think I know what happened. I turned toward her. What do you mean? Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I spent years teaching you how to carry life. She swallowed hard. Then she whispered, but I never taught Daniel how to carry it with someone. Mom barely slept that night. Years later, she would tell me exactly what happened. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound seemed louder than usual, because understanding had finally arrived, and understanding is noisy. Memories began resurfacing, not dramatic memories, ordinary ones, the dangerous kind, the kind people overlook because they seem harmless. She remembered teaching me to iron. While Daniel played outside, she remembered teaching me to babysit. While Daniel watched television, she remembered teaching me how to stretch grocery money. While Daniel spent his allowance without thinking twice. None of those memories felt wrong individually. That was what troubled her, because most harmful patterns never arrive looking harmful. They arrive disguised as normal. One truth life eventually teaches is this: the habits that shape a generation rarely announce themselves. They simply repeat themselves until somebody finally asks why. Mom had never asked why. Not until now. And now she could not stop. I looked out the window because there was nothing I could say. The truth had finally arrived, and truth does not need witnesses. It does not need arguments. It does not need proof. It simply stands there waiting. The hardest part was that Mom was only beginning to understand. She still believed the problem lived inside Daniel's marriage. She had not yet realized it lived inside generations. Inside traditions, inside assumptions, inside thousands of homes where daughters were prepared for responsibility, while sons were quietly excused from it, and life was about to force Eleanor Brooks to confront all of it. Because within 3 weeks, Maya would say something that would shake the entire family, something nobody was prepared to hear, something that would turn concern into crisis. And once those words were spoken, nothing would ever go back to the way it was before. 3 weeks later, the phone rang just after 9 o'clock at night. I remember the exact time because Ethan and I were getting ready for bed. The house was quiet. The children were asleep. The dishes were done. One of those ordinary evenings that disappear into memory unless something changes them forever. The caller ID said, "Mom." I answered immediately. "Hey, Mom." For several seconds she did not speak. My stomach tightened. "Mom," when she finally answered. Her voice sounded strange, thin, unsteady, like someone standing in a place they never expected to find themselves. "Grace, what is wrong?" Mom exhaled slowly. The sound trembled more than her words had. Then, "I think Daniel and Maya are separating." The room suddenly felt colder. I sat down on the edge of the bed. "What?" Mom repeated herself. This time, slower, as though saying it carefully might somehow make it less true. "I think Daniel and Maya are separating." Across the room, Ethan looked up immediately. He could tell from my face that something was wrong. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "Did they tell you that?" "No." "Then why do you think that?" Mom inhaled deeply. Then she told me everything. Earlier that evening, she had stopped by their house unexpectedly. Nothing unusual. She often dropped off leftovers, sometimes cookies, sometimes soup. Mothers find reasons. That was what mothers did. When she arrived, Daniel was outside, sitting alone on the back porch. In the dark, Mom immediately knew something was wrong, because Daniel hated sitting still, even as a child. Stillness usually meant pain. She sat beside him, asked if everything was okay. At first he said yes, then no, then he started crying. Mom had not seen Daniel cry since Dad died. Not once, not even at the funeral. But that night he cried. Hard. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that has been waiting a long time. According to Mom, his first words were, "I don't think Maya loves me anymore." When Mom repeated that sentence, my chest tightened, because I knew Daniel, and I knew Maya, and I suspected the truth was far more complicated than that. The next morning, I called Maya, not to pry, not to choose sides, simply because some silences become dangerous. When left alone, she answered after the third ring. Her voice sounded tired, the same tired I had heard months earlier, only heavier, like exhaustion that had finally stopped pretending to be temporary. "Grace, hey, Mom told you something was wrong." Not a question, a statement. I closed my eyes. "She did." The line went quiet, not disconnected, just heavy with everything. Neither of us wanted to say first. Then Maya sighed. Long, slow. The sigh of someone who had spent years carrying words and finally run out of places to store them. "I don't know what to do anymore." I leaned back in my chair. "Talk to me, Maya." For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then, the truth finally began emerging. Not all at once. Truth rarely does. Truth comes in pieces. One memory, one frustration, one disappointment, one wound, until eventually the entire picture appears. Maya told me about the forgotten appointments, the school meetings she attended alone, the birthdays she planned, the lunches she packed, the bills she organized, the vacations she researched, the medicine she remembered, the calendars she maintained, the hours she spent working, the household she still managed afterward, every detail, every responsibility, every invisible task. And the entire time Daniel believed they were sharing the work. That realization hit me harder than anything else, because from Daniel's perspective, he was helping. He took out trash. He mowed the lawn. He fixed things when they broke. He loved his children. He loved his wife. In his mind, he was doing his part. The problem was that Maya was carrying the part he could not even see. There is a dangerous kind of blindness that has nothing to do with eyesight. It happens when someone has never been required to notice what another person is carrying. If you never learn to see a burden, you cannot help lift it, and eventually the person carrying it begins to wonder whether you even care. Not because you are cruel, because you are absent in ways you do not recognize. Near the end of our conversation, Maya said something that stayed with me, something I would repeat to Ethan later that night, something I would remember years afterward. She said, "Daniel thinks I want help." Her voice broke. "But I don't want help." I frowned. "What do you want?" For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, "I want him to notice." The words hit me like a punch, because suddenly I understood this had never been about dishes or laundry or appointments or chores. It was about awareness, about partnership, about carrying responsibility without needing to be directed every step of the way, about seeing another person's exhaustion before they collapse under it. When the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. Ethan eventually joined me. I told him everything. Every word, every fear, every frustration. When I finished, he remained silent, thinking. Then he asked a question. One simple question. A question I would later ask Mom. Did anybody ever teach Daniel how to do that? I stared at him. He continued. I thought about it. Then I realized something unsettling. No, not really. We taught Daniel how to be kind, how to work hard, how to respect people, how to stay out of trouble, how to be successful. But nobody had ever deliberately taught him how to anticipate needs, how to share emotional labor, how to notice what someone else was carrying. Nobody taught him, because everyone assumed he would figure it out. Life is full of assumptions. Some become wisdom. Others become debts. And debts always come due eventually. The following Sunday, Mom invited the entire family to dinner. Everyone, me, Ethan, Daniel, Maya, the children. At first I thought she was trying to repair things. Later, I realized she was trying to understand them. That realization changed everything. Repair begins with solutions. Understanding begins with listening. Mom was finally ready to listen. The dinner started normally, children running through hallways, laughter, food, stories, the familiar rhythm of family. For a while, it almost felt like old times. Then Noah said something. One sentence. One small sentence. And suddenly, the room fell silent. It happened after dinner. The women were clearing plates. The men were still sitting at the table talking. Noah watched the scene unfold, then casually announced, "Good thing girls like cleaning." The room froze. Every conversation stopped. Every movement paused. Even the children sensed something had changed. Noah looked around, confused. What? Mom slowly set down the plate she was holding. Nobody corrected Noah. Nobody laughed. Nobody argued. The room simply sat with the words, and somehow that made them feel heavier. For years, Mom had believed these things happened naturally, that boys and girls simply became different people as they grew older. Now she was no longer sure, because children do not invent entire worldviews on their own. They inherit them, piece by piece, moment by moment, example by example. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Brooks was forced to ask herself a question she never imagined asking. Had love accidentally taught the wrong lesson? The answer was coming, and it was going to hurt, because some truths break your heart, others break your pride. The worst ones do both. Finally, Mom spoke. Her voice was gentle. Very gentle, Noah. Yes, Grandma. What makes you think girls like cleaning more than boys? He shrugged. The way children do when they believe the answer is obvious. They just do. Then, Mom looked at Noah for a long moment. The sadness in her eyes seemed to confuse him. Then she quietly asked, "Who told you that?" Noah frowned. Nobody. The answer should have comforted her. Instead, it made her heart sink, because nobody had needed to tell him. He had simply been paying attention. Even when adults think they are not, children watch patterns. Children study expectations. Children collect examples, and eventually, they build beliefs out of them. Noah did not learn that girls clean because someone lectured him. He learned it because he saw who usually stood up after dinner, who remembered things, who handled things, who carried things. Children often believe what they see, long before they believe what they hear. For the first time in my life, she looked old. The weight of understanding seemed to add years in a single afternoon, like someone staring at a map and realizing they had been walking in the wrong direction for years. After dinner, Ethan quietly helped clear the table. Not because anybody asked, because Ethan always noticed. Daniel remained seated with Noah, talking about soccer, laughing, completely unaware of the storm unfolding around him. Watching them made something inside me ache, because Daniel was not a bad man. That was what made this so painful. If he were cruel, the solution would be obvious. If he were selfish, the answer would be simple. But Daniel loved his family deeply. The problem was that love and awareness are not the same thing. A person can love you completely and still fail to see what you carry. That night, after everyone left, Mom asked me to stay. The house felt unusually quiet. She stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. The same kitchen where she had spent decades raising us. The same kitchen where so many lessons had been taught. Eventually she spoke. "When your father was alive, I did everything." I turned toward her. The statement surprised me. Mom rarely talked about her marriage. Not because it was unhappy, because private people often keep their stories tucked away. "What do you mean?" She smiled sadly. "The cooking, the laundry, the appointments, the bills, the children, the house." She exhaled slowly, as though deciding how honest she was willing to be. "I did all of it." I sat quietly, listening. She continued. "Your father worked hard," I nodded. That part was true. He loved us, also true. But nobody ever taught him how to share those responsibilities. Her eyes filled with tears, and nobody taught me to expect him to. The room became silent, because suddenly we were no longer talking about Daniel. We were talking about generations, about traditions, about things passed from parent to child without examination. Mom slowly sat down. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I thought I was helping you." The words broke my heart because I knew exactly what she meant. All those years teaching me, preparing me, equipping me, protecting me. Everything had come from love. I know, I wanted you to be capable. You succeeded. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but I never stopped to ask if I was teaching Daniel the same things. There are moments in life when people stop defending themselves. Mom had reached one of those moments. No excuses, no justifications, just honesty. And honesty often hurts. The next few weeks brought more tension, not loud tension, quiet tension, the dangerous kind, the kind that grows behind closed doors. Maya became more withdrawn. Daniel became more confused. The children sensed something was wrong, even if they could not name it. One Friday evening, Daniel showed up at my house unexpectedly. Alone, he looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. Ethan greeted him warmly. The three of us sat outside on the back deck. For a while, nobody discussed the obvious. Men often do that. Circle around pain, approach it slowly, as though moving carefully might make it less painful. Eventually, Daniel spoke. I don't understand. Ethan remained quiet, waiting. Daniel rubbed his face. I love her. Ethan nodded once. I know you do. I would do anything for her. A faint sadness crossed Ethan's face, as though he had heard those words before. I know. Then why is she so unhappy? The sadness in his voice was genuine, completely genuine. That was what made it difficult, because he was not pretending. He truly did not understand. Ethan leaned forward. What does a typical day look like for Maya? Daniel frowned. The question seemed unrelated. I don't know. Ethan nodded. What time does she wake up? Daniel hesitated. I am not sure. What time do the kids leave for school? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, searching for an answer that refused to come. I think 8. Ethan nodded. Who usually remembers the kids' appointments? Daniel looked away. Who keeps track of school deadlines? His jaw tightened. Who knows where everything is when something goes wrong? This time, no answer came at all. Daniel's expression slowly changed. The realization had not arrived yet, but it was approaching. Like distant thunder, Ethan spoke carefully, not judging, not attacking, just asking. Who keeps track of all those things? Daniel stared at the deck. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The answer was obvious. Maya. Every single time. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Daniel left looking thoughtful. Troubled. For the first time, I think he was beginning to see something. Not everything. Just enough. Sometimes growth begins with a crack. A tiny crack in a belief. A tiny crack in certainty. A tiny crack in the story we tell ourselves about who we are. The crack had finally appeared. The problem was that Maya was running out of strength. And growth takes time. More time than exhausted hearts are sometimes willing to give. A week later, everything changed, because Maya finally said the words she had been carrying for years. Not to me, not to Mom, not to a friend, to Daniel. And when she said them, the entire foundation of their marriage shook. Because some conversations start arguments, others start transformation. The difference usually depends on whether people are willing to hear the truth after it is spoken. Daniel was about to find out which kind of conversation this would be. Some moments divide a life into before and after. Not because they are loud, not because they are dramatic, because once they happen, you can never return to who you were before you heard them. The conversation happened on a Thursday night. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, two people sat across from each other at a kitchen table they had shared for nearly 11 years. A table that had seen birthday cakes, homework projects, family dinners, Christmas mornings, late-night talks, and now the conversation neither of them had wanted to have. I did not hear the conversation myself. Daniel told me later, months later, after enough healing had happened for him to finally speak about it. Even then, his voice trembled, because some truths continue hurting long after they are spoken. According to Daniel, It began with a simple question. Maya sat across from him, exhausted, quiet, holding a cup of tea she barely touched. Then she asked, "Are you happy?" Daniel frowned. The question surprised him. Of course, Maya nodded slowly, as though weighing the answer. Then she asked, "Do you think I am?" The room suddenly felt different. Daniel told me he already knew the answer. He just did not want to admit it, because admitting it would require looking at things he had spent years avoiding, not intentionally, not maliciously, just comfortably. Comfort has a way of hiding problems, especially when someone else is carrying them for you. Daniel stared at his wife, then quietly answered. No. Maya looked down. Not angry, not emotional, just tired. There it was again. That word, tired. It followed her everywhere now, like a shadow, like a warning, like a debt, finally demanding payment. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Maya said, "I don't think I can keep doing this." Daniel felt panic immediately. Not irritation, not defensiveness, fear, real fear. What does that mean? Maya's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. Daniel reached for her hand. She let him hold it, but she did not squeeze back. Sometimes that hurts more. I love you. Her eyes closed briefly. I know. I love our children. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know. I love this family. Maya's eyes filled with tears. I know, Daniel. The way she said his name frightened him more than anything else because it sounded like agreement, not reassurance. Then she whispered, Love is not the part that is broken, but I do not think I can carry all of it anymore. Daniel later told me that was the moment something inside him finally broke open. Not because it was the first time she had expressed frustration, because it was the first time he truly listened. Listening and hearing are not the same thing. Hearing collects words. Listening collects meaning. For years, Daniel had heard Maya. That night, he finally listened. She began talking. Slowly at first, then steadily, like a dam releasing water that had been trapped for years. She told him about the school forms, the doctor appointments, the teacher emails, the grocery planning, the holiday schedules, the birthday gifts, the meal planning, the family calendar, the household management. The mental load, all the invisible things, all the forgotten things, all the exhausting things. The work nobody applauds because nobody sees it. At one point, she looked directly at him and said, If I disappeared for 2 weeks, would you know everything that needs to happen? Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped, because he honestly did not know. And for the first time, he understood that she knew he did not know. That realization crushed him, not because he felt accused, because he felt exposed. The truth often arrives like that, not as a weapon, as a mirror. And mirrors are difficult because they remove excuses. Maya continued, I don't need perfection. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't need you to do everything. She shook her head. I just need you to see it. Daniel stared at her, heart pounding, mind racing, trying desperately to understand how he had missed so much. Then Maya said the sentence that haunted him for months afterward, the sentence that eventually changed everything. She whispered, I feel alone even when you're here. The words landed between them, heavy, permanent, unavoidable. There is no defense against a statement like that. No clever answer, no quick fix, no explanation, only truth. And truth does not negotiate. Daniel later told me that was the first moment he realized this was not about chores, not about laundry, not about dishes, not about errands. It was about partnership, about emotional presence, about shared responsibility, about being seen. A house can survive broken appliances. A marriage can survive financial hardship. But feeling invisible inside your own relationship, that kind of wound cuts deeper than most people realize. The conversation lasted almost 3 hours. No yelling, no insults, no slammed doors. Just honesty. Raw honesty, and honesty can be more painful than conflict, because conflict lets people hide behind anger. Honesty leaves nowhere to hide. Near the end of the conversation, Maya asked him something. A question so simple it sounded harmless. A question so powerful it changed everything. She asked, "When was the last time you noticed I was struggling before I told you?" Daniel could not answer. Not because he did not care, because he genuinely did not know, and that silence told him everything. At the time, all I saw was a tired woman. Years later, I understood something more. The person carrying the heaviest burden is often the person asking for the least attention. By the time they finally speak, they are usually speaking from exhaustion, not weakness. That night, Daniel barely slept. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to rain, listening to silence, listening to every memory his mind suddenly refused to stop replaying. He remembered childhood, the kitchen, the chores, the expectations, Grace learning, Grace helping, Grace preparing, and himself playing, relaxing, being excused, being protected, being told he is a boy. The words echoed differently now, not comforting, not harmless, heavy because every shortcut life gives us eventually presents a bill, and sooner or later, someone has to pay it. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Daniel walked downstairs. The house was dark, the kitchen empty, the same kitchen where Maya carried so much unseen weight. He stood there quietly. Looking around, for the first time in his life, he tried to imagine everything she remembered every day. The lunches, the appointments, the medications, the schedules, the supplies, the forms, the planning, the endless invisible work. The list felt overwhelming, and suddenly, a terrible realization hit him. Maya had been carrying all of it for years, without applause, without recognition, without relief. The realization hurt, but another realization hurt even more. He had loved her deeply, sincerely, faithfully, and still failed her, because love without awareness can accidentally become another burden. A painful one. The next morning, Daniel called Mom, and what he said on that phone call would break Eleanor Brooks' heart. Not because she did not know it already, because hearing it from her son would make it impossible to deny. And for the first time in her life, Mom would have to face a truth she had spent decades unknowingly helping create. Mom told me later that when her phone rang at 6:30 in the morning, she knew immediately something was wrong. Daniel never called that early, not unless there was an emergency or heartbreak. Sometimes the two arrived together. She answered on the second ring. Daniel, for a moment, all she heard was breathing. Then, "Mom?" His voice sounded different. Fragile, not broken. "Not yet, but close. What's wrong?" Another silence. Then the question. One question. Simple. Direct. Devastating. "Why didn't anybody teach me?" Mom told me she stopped breathing for a second, because deep down, she already knew exactly what he meant. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them. Heavy, honest, painful. Finally, Mom whispered, not because she needed the answer, because she needed to hear him say it. "Teach you what?" Daniel laughed softly. "Not because anything was funny. Some people cry when their hearts break. Others laugh. The sound often comes from the same place. How to be a partner." Mom closed her eyes, because suddenly 35 years of memories came rushing back. Saturday mornings. Laundry baskets, kitchen lessons, excuses, assumptions, expectations. 1,000 moments that had seemed harmless at the time. 1,000 moments she would have gladly relived if she could. Because regret has a cruel habit. It teaches lessons after the test is already over. Daniel spoke again. "I know how to work." A shaky breath escaped him. "I know how to provide." Mom closed her eyes. "I know how to love my family." The next words seemed to cost him. "But I do not know how to see what Maya needs." His voice cracked, and I do not even know why. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had said before. The words shattered something inside her. Because she finally understood, the problem was not that Daniel refused responsibility. The problem was that responsibility had never been fully introduced to him. At least not the kind Maya needed. The invisible kind. The daily kind. The emotional kind. Mom slowly sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where she had spent years helping me learn skills she thought every woman needed. How strange life can be. Sometimes the very lessons we are proudest of become the source of our deepest questions. Not because the lessons were wrong, because they were incomplete. A bird needs 2 wings. A marriage needs 2 partners, and preparation should never belong to only one child. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice trembling. "I thought life would teach you," Daniel exhaled. Long, painful, it didn't. The truth settled between them. There are some truths that feel like stones. This was one of them, because life teaches many things. But life often teaches through consequences. And consequences can be expensive, especially inside relationships, especially inside families, especially when children are watching. After they hung up, Mom sat alone for nearly an hour, just thinking, remembering, revisiting years she could no longer change. The strange thing about memory is that it reorganizes itself once understanding arrives. Suddenly, old moments looked different. Mom remembered Thanksgiving dinners, women cooking, men relaxing. Nobody questioning it. Mom remembered teaching me recipes while Daniel watched television. Not because she excluded him, because she never considered inviting him. Mom remembered making excuses. Hundreds of excuses, maybe thousands. He is a boy. At the time, it sounded like an explanation. Now, it sounded like an excuse. He will learn later. That's different. Let him enjoy being young. None of those statements sounded dangerous at the time. Most family traditions do not. That is why they survive. The most powerful lessons are rarely announced. They are demonstrated, repeated, normalized, inherited. Then, one day, somebody discovers the inheritance contains things they never intended to pass down. Mom spent the next week wrestling with those thoughts. Then Sunday arrived, and with it came another family dinner. This time, something felt different. Daniel arrived early. Very early. Before everyone else, before Maya, before the children, Mom opened the door, and immediately knew something had changed. Daniel looked exhausted, but focused, like a man standing at the beginning of a long climb. Not the end. The beginning. There is an important difference. People often think transformation starts with confidence. It does not. Transformation usually starts with humility, the willingness to admit, I do not know something I should know. Daniel was finally standing in that place. The place where pride loses its grip, the place where growth becomes possible. He walked into the kitchen, looked around, then quietly asked, "Can you teach me?" Pride asks people to pretend they already know. Growth begins the moment someone becomes brave enough to admit they don't. Mom stared at him. What? He looked down, almost embarrassed. Everything for a moment. She thought she had misheard. Then he continued. The things Grace learned. Mom's eyes filled with tears. The things Maya carries, more tears. The things I should have learned years ago. The room became completely silent, because there are apologies spoken with words, and there are apologies spoken with humility. This was the second kind. Mom slowly reached for a chair, Saturday down and cried. Not loud crying, not dramatic crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. The kind that carries both sorrow and hope, because sorrow and hope often arrive together. One mourns what was lost. The other believes something can still be saved. Eventually, Daniel sat beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Then Mom smiled through tears. A small smile, a broken smile, a hopeful smile, and she said, Okay, that single word became the beginning of something neither of them expected. Not because it fixed everything, nothing was fixed. Not yet. Maya was still exhausted. The marriage was still fragile. Trust was still damaged. Awareness had only just begun. But a beginning had finally happened. And beginnings matter, especially when they arrive late. Looking back now, I think this was the lesson neither of us saw coming. The lessons we learn early become strengths. The lessons we learn late become humility. Humility is painful, but humility can build things pride never could. One Thursday afternoon, Maya received a call from Noah's teacher. Nothing serious. Just a reminder about an upcoming school project. The kind of thing parents handle every day. When Maya hung up, she realized something. She had forgotten, not completely, just long enough for the deadline to sneak closer than she liked. Before she could say anything, Daniel smiled. "I've got it." Maya looked surprised. "The project?" He nodded confidently. "Leave it with me." For the first time in years, she actually did. She let go. Just a little. The following Tuesday, Noah came home upset. The project was due the next morning. The supplies had never been purchased. The presentation board had never been ordered. The instructions were still sitting unopened in Daniel's email. The old Daniel would have immediately explained, defended, minimized. This time, he simply stared at the email, then looked at Noah, then at Maya, and finally whispered, "I forgot." The room became quiet, not angry, not explosive, quiet, because everybody suddenly understood something. This was what Maya had been carrying: the consequences, the fear, the remembering, the responsibility. Not because she was naturally better at it, because somebody had to be. That night, Daniel sat beside Noah until almost midnight, building the project, printing materials, cutting poster board, fixing mistakes, trying desperately to repair the situation. The next morning, Noah turned it in. Everything worked out. But Daniel did not forget the feeling. For the first time, he experienced the weight of being responsible for something another person depended on. And he hated the feeling. Not because it was difficult, because he realized Maya had lived inside that pressure for years. Alone. Over the next several weeks, Daniel began learning. Not performing, learning. For the first time, he was no longer trying to look different. He was trying to become different. And Daniel was about to become very uncomfortable, because growth would require him to see things he had spent 35 years overlooking. It would require him to change habits, challenge assumptions, question beliefs, and perhaps hardest of all, face the possibility that love alone had never been enough. Because love is a beautiful foundation, but foundations do not build houses by themselves. The house still needs walls, windows, work, effort, presence, and partnership. The question now was whether Daniel had started learning too late, because while he was finally changing, Maya was quietly reaching the edge of what she could endure, and neither of them yet understood how close they had come to losing everything. The first lesson arrived the following Tuesday, and it did not go well. Daniel called Mom around noon, frustrated, embarrassed, confused, 3 emotions that often accompany growth. Because growth sounds inspiring when people talk about it afterward. While it is happening, it usually feels uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable, Mom answered. "Hello, Mom." Something in his voice made her smile. "What happened?" Daniel sighed heavily, then confessed. "I tried making Lily's lunch." Mom laughed, not at him, with affection. "And I forgot the drink." Mom nodded. "Okay, I also forgot the napkin." "Okay." "And apparently the sandwich was cut wrong." Mom laughed harder. Daniel groaned. "This isn't funny." "Oh, I think it is a little funny." For the first time in weeks, Daniel laughed too. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Not because of lunch. For years, Daniel thought the hard part of family life was providing for it. He was beginning to realize that keeping a family running required an entirely different kind of labor, and Maya had been carrying that labor alone. That evening, Daniel came home determined. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and started making lunches for the next day. Without being asked, without announcing it, without expecting praise. Maya stood in the doorway watching, confused, suspicious. Exhausted people often become suspicious of change, not because they are cynical, because disappointment has taught them caution. She watched quietly, then asked, "What are you doing?" Daniel did not look up, making lunches. Silence, then, why? The question hurt, not because Maya meant it cruelly, because she genuinely could not imagine him doing it voluntarily. That realization stung, more than Daniel expected. He finished packing the lunches, placed them neatly in the refrigerator, then shrugged. They need to be done. Maya said nothing, just nodded, then walked away. The interaction lasted less than a minute, but Daniel later told me it felt like an hour, because he realized something important. Trust does not return because somebody changes once. Trust returns because somebody changes consistently, over time, again and again, until the new behavior becomes believable. That was the challenge ahead of him. Not proving he could change, proving he would keep changing. Several days later, Daniel finished dinner, loaded the dishwasher, cleaned the counters, packed lunches for the next morning, then turned off the kitchen light, feeling proud. Not arrogant, just proud. He walked upstairs. Halfway down the hallway, he noticed light coming from the kitchen again. Maya, she was standing in front of the refrigerator, checking everything, the lunches, the drinks, the snacks, the notes, everything. Daniel watched quietly. Eventually she noticed him. Embarrassed. "I was just making sure." The words hurt more than criticism ever could, because criticism means somebody is angry. This meant somebody still didn't trust him. Not completely. "Not yet." Daniel nodded slowly, then returned upstairs. No argument, no wounded pride, just understanding. Trust had not been broken in a day. It would not return in a day either. Some wounds heal slowly, not because people are unwilling to forgive, because trust rebuilds one experience at a time. The person asking for forgiveness measures change in intentions. The person granting forgiveness measures change in consistency. And consistency takes time. The following weekend brought another lesson, a harder one. Mom invited Daniel over. Alone, no children, no distractions. Just mother and son sitting at the same kitchen table where so many lessons should have happened years earlier. A notebook sat between them. Daniel looked at it. "What is that?" Mom smiled. "Homework!" He laughed. "You've got to be kidding." "I am not." She pushed the notebook toward him. Daniel opened it. Page after page filled the notebook. Notes, dates, reminders, information he had never realized someone was tracking every day. Daniel stared, then slowly turned another page. And another, and another. Finally, he looked up. "What is this?" Mom folded her arms. This is what Maya carries around in her head every day. Daniel looked back down. The pages seemed endless. Every page revealed something else. Maya had been remembering for the entire family. For several minutes, Daniel said nothing, then quietly asked, "She remembers all of this?" Mom nodded, most mothers do. A painful silence followed. Then Mom added, "Many fathers could too." That sentence landed differently, not as criticism, as possibility, because possibility is powerful. Possibility says, you could learn this, you could become this. You could carry this too. Daniel sat there staring at the notebook, then whispered, "I had no idea." Mom reached across the table, placed her hand over his. "I know." The sadness in her voice nearly broke him, because she wasn't judging him. She was grieving. Grieving the lessons she never thought to teach. Grieving the years he spent unprepared. Grieving the strain those missing lessons had placed on his marriage. There is a particular kind of pain parents carry, the pain of realizing they gave their children everything they knew, and still missed something important. Mom was carrying that pain now, and Daniel could finally see it. For the first time, mother and son were grieving the same thing. Not blame, not guilt, lost preparation, lost understanding, lost years. The next breakthrough happened unexpectedly. It came from Noah, as most important family moments seem to. Children have a way of revealing truths adults spend years avoiding. One evening, Daniel was helping Noah with homework, a simple science assignment, nothing remarkable. At some point, Noah became frustrated, threw his pencil down, crossed his arms. "I hate this." Daniel smiled. "I know." "No, you don't." "Actually, I do," Noah glared, then said something familiar, something painfully familiar. "Can Mom help me?" Daniel froze. Not because of the request, because of the reason. Noah immediately added, "Mom knows all that stuff." The words sounded innocent, but Daniel suddenly heard something underneath them. An assumption, the same kind of assumption that had followed him his entire life. Mom knows. Mom handles it. Mom remembers. Mom takes care of it. Mom carries it. Without realizing it, Noah was already learning the same lesson. The cycle was beginning again, and for the first time, Daniel saw it clearly. Like watching a movie he had somehow missed the first time. He slowly picked up the pencil, handed it back, then smiled. "Let's figure it out together." Noah looked surprised. "You know how?" Daniel laughed. "No," the boy frowned. "Then how?" Daniel leaned back. "Because learning is not Mom's job." The words hung in the air, unexpected, unfamiliar, but necessary. Something shifted inside Daniel as he said them. A realization, perhaps the deepest one yet. Children inherit what they see, not what we intend, not what we promise, not what we hope, what they see. And Noah had been watching everything. The way Daniel once watched, the way generations always watch. The hardest family lessons are rarely the ones we are taught. They are the ones we inherit without realizing it. The things we refuse to examine become the things we accidentally pass down. The things we finally confront can become the things that stop with us. That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel sat alone on the back porch, thinking, remembering, reflecting. The sky above was clear, the neighborhood quiet, and for the first time in months, he felt something unexpected. Hope, small, fragile, but real. Because for the first time, he was no longer asking, "Why is Maya unhappy?" Now he was asking, "What have I been missing?" The first question protects pride. The second question creates change. The problem was that Maya still did not know whether change had arrived too late. And in the coming days, she would finally tell Daniel exactly how close she had come to leaving. Not threatening, not manipulating, not punishing. Simply telling the truth, and the truth would shake him more than anything he had heard so far. Because sometimes the most painful words are not, "I am leaving." Sometimes the most painful words are, "I almost did." The conversation happened on a Wednesday evening. Ordinary, quiet, unremarkable. The kind of evening most people forget. Which is strange, because some of the biggest moments in life arrive disguised as ordinary days. The children were asleep upstairs. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The dishwasher hummed in the background. Daniel had spent nearly 2 months trying, really trying, not performing, not making grand speeches, trying packing lunches, managing appointments, learning schedules, sharing responsibilities, paying attention for the first time in his life. He was beginning to understand what partnership actually required, and yet something still felt unfinished. Maya noticed it too. Progress had happened, real progress, but pain does not disappear the moment effort arrives. A wound can begin healing and still hurt when touched. That evening they sat together on the couch, not speaking, just sitting, the way married people often do after a long day. Eventually Maya broke the silence. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel looked over, immediately serious, of course. She stared at her hands, turning her wedding ring slowly around her finger, not removing it, just touching it, thinking, remembering, gathering courage. Then she said, I almost left. The words hit harder than Daniel expected, not because he had never feared them, because hearing them out loud made them real. For several seconds he could not speak. His throat felt tight, his chest felt hollow. Finally he managed. When? Maya swallowed. Last year, the room suddenly felt smaller. Daniel stared at her, trying to process what he had just heard. Last year, not last month, not last week, last year. That meant she had been carrying that pain for much longer than he realized. Much longer. Why didn't you tell me? The question escaped before he could stop it. Maya laughed softly. A sad laugh, a tired laugh, the kind that comes from old hurt. I did, Daniel frowned. No, you didn't. She looked at him, directly, honestly, and quietly said, Yes, I did. The words landed like stones, because deep down he knew she was right. She had told him, again and again, just not in the way he expected. She told him through exhaustion, through frustration, through tears, through conversations he only half heard, through requests for help, through disappointment, through loneliness. She had been speaking for years. The problem was that Daniel had been listening for complaints instead of pain. There is a difference. One sounds annoying, the other sounds heartbreaking, and which one we hear often depends on whether we are listening with pride or humility. Maya wiped a tear from her cheek. I kept hoping things would change. Daniel looked down ashamed, not because he was being attacked, because he finally understood. Hope can keep people in difficult situations longer than almost anything else. It whispers, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next month, maybe after the holidays, maybe after the kids get older, maybe after work slows down, maybe after one more conversation. For a long time, that voice feels comforting. Then one day, it sounds different. Not hopeful, exhausted. And exhausted hope is one of the saddest things in the world. Maya leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. When Lily was 3, I sat in the car one day after grocery shopping. Daniel remained silent, listening. Really listening. I cried for almost 40 minutes. His heart sank. I didn't know. Maya's shoulders sagged slightly, I know. The answer was not angry. That somehow made it worse. I didn't know. For a moment, Maya closed her eyes, then opened them again. I know, again. No accusation. Just truth, and truth is often far more painful than blame, because blame can be argued with. Truth simply exists, Maya continued. I remember thinking, her voice trembled, that if I disappeared for a week, nobody would even know how many things I actually did. Daniel felt tears filling his eyes, because he knew she was right. Back then he would not have known. Not fully, not even close, at the time. I thought Maya was exhausted. Years later, I realized it was deeper than that. Being needed is not the same as being appreciated. Some people spend so long carrying everyone else that they stop asking, can somebody help me? They start wondering, does anybody even see me? That question is dangerous, because once it enters a relationship, it rarely leaves on its own. The room fell silent again, long enough for the rain to become noticeable. Long enough for memories to settle between them. Finally, Daniel asked, What stopped you? Maya closed her eyes. The answer came almost immediately. The children. Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected that answer. Then she surprised him. The second thing was you. He looked up, confused. What do you mean? A small smile touched her face, not a happy smile. A remembering smile. I knew your heart. Daniel stared at her. She continued. I knew you loved us. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I just didn't know if you understood us. The words nearly broke him because they captured everything. Everything. Daniel had spent years believing love was enough. Work hard, stay faithful, provide, love your family, Surely, that was enough. But now he understood something painful. Love is the beginning, not the completion. Love opens the door. Partnership walks through it. Love makes promises. Partnership keeps them. Love says, I would do anything for you. Partnership notices what needs doing before it is asked. That realization settled heavily inside him. But unlike shame, it also carried possibility. Because possibility says, you can learn, you can grow, you can become different. The conversation continued for another hour, not fighting, not fixing. Just understanding. Sometimes understanding is the first miracle, not reconciliation, not forgiveness. Understanding because people cannot heal wounds they refuse to acknowledge. And for the first time in years, both of them were looking at the same wound, the same truth, the same reality. Together, when the conversation finally ended, Maya started toward the stairs, then paused, turned back, and said something neither of them would ever forget. I don't need you to be perfect, Daniel nodded, tears still in his eyes. I know. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, I just need to know I'm not carrying this life by myself. After she disappeared upstairs, Daniel sat alone in the living room, listening to the rain, thinking about every version of himself that had existed before that moment. The boy who never folded laundry, the teenager who never learned to cook, the young man who assumed someone else would remember the details, the husband who thought love was enough. All of them suddenly felt very far away, because growth had finally arrived. Real growth. Not the kind people post online, the painful kind, the expensive kind, the kind purchased with humility, the kind that forces you to face what you missed. Real change rarely begins with criticism. It begins with clarity. The people who change the most are often not the people who were hated. They are the people who finally become unable to ignore what their love has cost someone else. Daniel had reached that place. The question now was whether the damage could be repaired, because growth is powerful, but healing requires something else. Time, trust, consistency, and those things cannot be rushed. Meanwhile, Eleanor Brooks was preparing to do something she had never done before. Something that would surprise her entire family. Something that would force her to confront the past openly, because understanding what went wrong was no longer enough. Now she needed to say it out loud. And sometimes speaking, the truth is harder than discovering it. The family gathering happened 2 months later, not because of a holiday, not because of a birthday, not because of an emergency. Mom simply called everyone and said, I would like the family together this Sunday. That was enough. When Eleanor Brooks requested something, people showed up. Not out of fear, out of respect. Over the years she had become the center of the family, the keeper of traditions, the organizer of gatherings, the person who remembered birthdays without reminders, the person who sent cards, the person who called when somebody was hurting, the person who held everyone together, which made what happened that afternoon even more surprising. The dining room looked exactly as it always had. The same table, the same framed photographs, the same worn wooden chairs, the same house where Daniel and I had grown up, the same house where so many lessons had been taught and where some had been missed. Everyone arrived around noon. Ethan and I came first, then Daniel and Maya, then the children. The atmosphere felt warm, comfortable, different. Not perfect, but different. Over the previous 2 months, Daniel had continued changing. Quietly, consistently, not dramatically. Not for attention. For real. The difference showed up in everyday moments. He no longer waited to be told. He paid attention. He remembered. He followed through. The responsibilities Maya once carried alone were slowly becoming shared. Not perfectly, but consistently. The distinction mattered. Partnership is not replacing one exhausted person with another. Partnership is sharing the weight. And for the first time in years, Maya looked lighter. Not because life had become easier, because she was no longer carrying it alone. Still, scars remained. Trust was rebuilding slowly, carefully, the way trust always rebuilds. Like a bridge reconstructed plank by plank. One day at a time, one action at a time, one promise at a time. That afternoon, everyone gathered around the table, children laughing, adults talking, the familiar rhythm of family. Then Mom stood, and immediately the room quieted. Because Eleanor Brooks rarely stood during family meals, not unless she had something important to say. She looked around the table, at her children, at their spouses, at her grandchildren, the people she loved most in the world. Then she took a deep breath. I owe all of you an apology. The room became completely silent. Nobody moved. Chairs creaked softly around the table, yet nobody seemed ready to break them because nobody expected those words. Least of all from her. Mom looked down briefly, gathering herself, then continued. I spent most of my life believing I was preparing my children for adulthood. Tears already glistened in her eyes. And I was. She nodded. I taught Grace many things. I felt my chest tighten. Cooking, cleaning, budgeting, responsibility, perseverance, the skills she believed life required. Then Mom looked toward Daniel. But I did not teach my son many of those same things. The silence deepened. No defensiveness. No excuses. Just truth. Raw and honest. Mom continued. I never meant harm. Nobody doubted that. Not for a second. Everything she had done came from love. That was what made it so heartbreaking. Sometimes, the deepest mistakes are made by people with the best intentions. Love does not make us perfect. It simply makes us care. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I thought life would teach him. She looked directly at Daniel. I was wrong. The words hung in the room, heavy, permanent, necessary. Daniel lowered his eyes, unable to speak. Mom continued, her voice trembling now. I taught my daughter how to carry a household. She swallowed hard, but I never taught my son how to help carry one. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away, because everyone understood the courage required to say those words, especially at her age, especially after a lifetime of believing she had done everything right. There is a kind of bravery that belongs to youth, the bravery of trying, the bravery of dreaming, the bravery of beginning. But there is another kind of bravery that belongs to wisdom, the bravery of admitting, I got something wrong. That bravery may be harder. Mom looked toward Noah. Then Lily, then all of us. I don't want that lesson passed down again. The room remained silent, but something shifted. Something important. Because truths spoken aloud lose some of their power to hide, and hidden things are often what shape families the most. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Daniel stood, walked around the table, and hugged her tightly, like a little boy again. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Daniel whispered, You taught me enough to learn. The words broke whatever composure remained. Mom cried. I cried. Maya cried. Even Ethan looked suspiciously emotional. The children looked confused, but children often sense significance even when they do not understand it. After a while, everyone sat back down. The conversation slowly resumed, but the atmosphere felt different. Lighter, not because everything was fixed, because honesty had entered the room. Honesty often creates space for healing. The most meaningful moment happened later that afternoon. A small moment, the kind many people would miss. Noah finished eating, stood up, picked up his plate, then reached for Lily's too. Nobody asked him, nobody reminded him, nobody instructed him. He simply did it, then carried both plates into the kitchen. Mom noticed first. Of course she did. She watched him disappear into the kitchen, then quietly smiled. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sadness, from hope, because hope had returned, and hope looks beautiful after a long absence. For years, we thought the story was about a marriage. In the end, it was about a legacy. The greatest victories are not won against other people. They are won against patterns, against assumptions, against cycles that quietly repeat themselves across generations. Breaking a cycle rarely makes headlines, but it changes lives. Sometimes entire family trees. One evening nearly 4 months after Mom's apology, Maya sat on the back porch alone. The sun had already disappeared. The neighborhood was quiet. Daniel stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her, then sat down. For several minutes neither spoke. Finally Maya broke the silence. "Can I tell you something honestly?" Daniel nodded. "Always." She looked down at her cup, then whispered, "Sometimes I am still angry." Daniel's chest tightened, not because he was surprised, because part of him had hoped they were past that stage. Growth teaches many lessons. One of them is this: the people we hurt do not heal according to our schedule. Maya continued, "I know you're trying." Daniel listened. Really listened. "I see it." She nodded. "I appreciate it." Then tears appeared, but sometimes I think about all those years. Her voice cracked. "All those years I spent drowning while smiling." Daniel stared at the ground. The old version of him would have defended himself, explained, justified. The new version stayed quiet because not every wound needs an explanation. Sometimes it simply needs acknowledgement. After a while he reached for her hand and softly said, "I am angry about those years too." Maya looked at him, surprised. Daniel swallowed hard. "Not at you." He shook his head. "At myself." The confession hung between them. Raw, honest. "Painful. I can't get them back." His voice broke. "I can't give you back the days you spent carrying everything alone." Tears filled Maya's eyes, because regret is a strange thing. When it is genuine, it hurts both people. The one who suffered, and the one who finally understands. For several moments they sat quietly, watching the darkness settle across the neighborhood. Then Maya squeezed his hand, the first time she had done that without hesitation in months. Not because everything was fixed, because trust had begun returning slowly, carefully, one small moment at a time. The thing about trust is that it rarely returns because of promises. It returns because of patterns. The deepest apologies are not spoken. They are lived. Every packed lunch, every remembered appointment, every shared responsibility, every moment of awareness. Those became Daniel's apology, day after day, month after month, year after year. And eventually Maya stopped looking for proof, because the proof had become their daily life. People often believe apologies change everything. They do not. Apologies open doors. What happens after the door opens determines whether healing actually enters. The hardest year of Daniel and Maya's marriage was not the year before the crisis. It was the year after. Most people would never understand that. From the outside, things looked better. Daniel was helping. The arguments were fewer. The tension had eased. The children seemed happier. The family felt more connected. But underneath all of that, Maya was still healing, and healing is not the same thing as forgiveness. Over the next year, Daniel continued growing. Not perfectly. Nobody grows perfectly. There were forgotten appointments, missed details, small setbacks, frustration, failure. But he kept learning, kept showing up, kept paying attention. The changes were small, easy to miss on any single day. But trust heals slower than effort, and eventually Maya began believing what she was seeing. The burden on her shoulders grew lighter. The loneliness faded, the partnership deepened, and one evening nearly a year later, something happened. Something simple, something beautiful, something that would have meant nothing to outsiders, but everything to them. Daniel was cleaning the kitchen after dinner. The children were upstairs. The house was quiet. Maya walked in, leaned against the counter, and simply watched him. After a moment, Daniel looked up and said, "What?" She smiled. A real smile, the kind he had not seen in a long time. Then she crossed the room, wrapped her arms around him, and rested her head against his shoulder. No speech, no grand declaration, no dramatic moment, just peace. The kind of peace exhausted people dream about. After several seconds, she whispered, "Thank you." Daniel swallowed hard, because he knew exactly what she meant. Not thank you for washing dishes, not thank you for helping. Thank you for finally standing beside me. There is a difference, a very important difference. Meanwhile, another transformation was happening. One, nobody expected. Mom had started volunteering at the community center. At first, she told everyone it was simply to stay busy. That was only part of the truth. The real reason was harder to admit. She could not stop thinking about the mothers she knew, young mothers, grandmothers, single mothers, married mothers, women doing exactly what she had done, teaching daughters, excusing sons, repeating patterns. Not out of cruelty, out of habit. One afternoon she stood in front of a small parenting group, about 20 people, most younger than her. She looked around the room, then smiled. I spent years teaching my daughter how to become a good wife. The room nodded. Several mothers smiled. Mom took a breath, then continued. And I forgot to spend the same energy teaching my son how to become a good husband. The room became quiet. Very quiet. Because uncomfortable truths often sound obvious once somebody says them aloud. For the next hour, she spoke honestly about mistakes, about assumptions, about expectations, about partnership, about raising capable children regardless of gender. When she finished, several people approached her. One young mother cried. A father thanked her. A grandmother hugged her. Mom drove home that evening feeling lighter than she had in years, because wisdom becomes powerful when it stops being private. Years later, she would say, regret becomes useful the moment it helps someone else avoid the same mistake. That became one of her favorite sayings, and perhaps her truest. By the time Noah reached high school, something had changed. One evening, Mom watched him help Lily clean the kitchen, not because he had been told, not because he was rewarded, because he noticed she was overwhelmed. The sight nearly brought tears to her eyes. Again, Noah carried dishes to the sink, rinsed them, loaded the dishwasher, then quietly took over wiping the counters while Lily finished putting food away. Neither of them made a big deal about it. Neither seemed to think they were doing anything unusual. That was what made the moment so powerful. Years earlier, Noah would have assumed someone else would handle it. Now he simply stepped forward, the way people do when they notice another person carrying too much. Mom stood quietly in the doorway, watching, remembering, thinking about all the years it had taken to arrive at a moment that lasted less than 5 minutes. For so long, she believed the story was about Daniel, about Maya, about a marriage struggling beneath invisible weight. Now she understood it had always been bigger than that. It was about legacy, about what survives us, about the lessons our children carry into futures we will never fully see. And standing there in that kitchen, watching Noah quietly share the load, Mom finally felt something she had not felt in a very long time: peace. Not because she had been perfect, because the lesson had survived her mistakes. And sometimes, that is enough. Sometimes the most beautiful family stories are not about people who never make mistakes. They are about people brave enough to correct them, and the people who choose to love them through the correction. Because in the end, a home is not built by one strong person. It is built by people who notice when someone else is getting tired and step forward before they have to ask. Years later, when Noah left for college, Mom gave him a handwritten letter. Inside was a sentence she wanted him to remember. A sentence written in her careful handwriting. A sentence born from lessons learned late. A sentence purchased with tears, humility, and growth. It said, "Never build a life that requires someone you love to carry it alone." Noah kept that letter for the rest of his life, and perhaps that is how healing truly works. Not by erasing mistakes, not by pretending they never happened, but by transforming them into wisdom. Wisdom strong enough to guide the next generation somewhere better. 10 years passed, not all at once. Life never moves that way. It moves through ordinary Tuesdays, school concerts, soccer games, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, unexpected phone calls, hospital visits, family dinners, 1,000 little moments that quietly become a decade. Mom was 77 now. Her hair had become completely silver. The wrinkles around her eyes had deepened, but there was something softer about her too. Something peaceful. The burden she had carried for years had slowly loosened its grip, not disappeared. Some regrets never disappear completely, but transformed, and transformed regret becomes wisdom. The family had changed. Noah was 21. Lily was 19, both in college, both finding their place in the world. Daniel and Maya had reached a place neither of them thought possible during those difficult years. Not perfection. Something better. Partnership. Real partnership. The kind built through thousands of ordinary choices. The kind nobody notices because it does not announce itself. You see it in little things. The way Daniel automatically checked the family calendar, the way Maya no longer carried every responsibility alone, the way decisions happened together, the way burdens moved naturally from one set of shoulders to another, shared, balanced, human. For years, I thought successful marriages were built on compatibility. Now I think they are built on something simpler. The strongest marriages rarely survive because two people are extraordinary. They survive because neither person lets the other fight alone for too long. One Saturday afternoon, Mom sat on her front porch drinking tea, watching the neighborhood, watching children ride bicycles, watching life continue the way life always does. Noah's car pulled into the driveway. A few moments later, he walked toward the porch. A young woman walked beside him, tall, confident. Beautiful smile. Mom immediately knew. Grandmothers always know. Noah climbed the steps. Grandma, she smiled. Hello, handsome. The young woman laughed. Noah rolled his eyes. Grandma, what? The woman extended her hand. I am Emma. Mom shook it warmly. So you are the one. Noah groaned. Emma laughed again. Mom liked her immediately. Not because she was charming, because she looked comfortable being herself. People who are comfortable being themselves tend to make life easier for everyone around them. The three of them sat together talking for nearly an hour. School, work, life, dreams, future plans, ordinary conversation. Then something happened, something small, something most people would never remember. Mom would remember it forever. Emma's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Oh no, what? She looked frustrated. I completely forgot. Noah smiled. What is it? I was supposed to pick up supplies for my presentation. The store closed in 45 minutes. Emma immediately stood. I am sorry. You don't need to apologize. I do. No, she looked worried. I can't believe I forgot. Noah grabbed his keys. Let's go. Emma blinked. What? We have time. The word we. Mom noticed it immediately. Emma noticed it too, because her expression softened. Are you sure? Noah laughed. Pretty sure. Then he said something that made Eleanor Brooks grip her teacup a little tighter. Something simple. Something ordinary. Something beautiful. We will figure it out. We will. Not you will. Not you should. Not you forgot. We will. Mom felt tears filling her eyes, because suddenly she wasn't looking at her grandson. She was looking at the future, and the future looked different. The two young people hurried toward the car laughing, planning, problem-solving together, neither noticing the elderly woman quietly crying on the porch behind them. After they drove away, Mom sat there for a long time, thinking, remembering, reflecting. The memories came back one after another. Grace carrying laundry baskets. Daniel sitting in front of the television, the kitchen lessons, the excuses, the assumptions, the tears, the conversations, the apologies, the growth, the healing, all of it. A lifetime of lessons, a lifetime of mistakes, a lifetime of love. Then something occurred to her, something she wished she had understood decades earlier. We spend so much time trying to raise successful children, good students, hard workers, responsible adults. But perhaps one of the most important things we can teach them is how to live alongside another person, how to recognize that love requires participation, that families require effort, that responsibility belongs to everyone who benefits from it. Because eventually almost everyone becomes responsible for someone other than themselves. A spouse, a child, a parent, a friend, a community. And when that day arrives, character matters. Awareness matters, partnership matters. A week later, the entire family gathered for Mom's birthday. 77 years old, 3 generations around one table, children, grandchildren, stories, laughter, life. At one point, Noah stood to help clear the table without being asked. Lily joined him. Without being asked, then Daniel stood, then Ethan. Soon everyone was helping, talking, laughing. Working together, plates moved from hand to hand. Someone rinsed. Someone dried. Someone loaded the dishwasher. The work belonged to everyone, not just one person. Mom sat quietly watching, her heart full, because sometimes healing looks ordinary. Sometimes it looks like a family doing dishes together, and nobody realizing how many years it took to arrive at that moment. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Mom sat alone in her kitchen. The same kitchen, the very same one. The place where so much of this story had begun. Moonlight spilled through the window. The house was quiet, peaceful. She looked around the room, then smiled. Thinking about Noah, thinking about Lily, thinking about the family gathered around her table only hours earlier. And finally, Mom understood something all those years had been trying to teach her. The goal of parenting is not raising children who need us forever. The goal is raising people who know how to care for others when we are gone. Not because someone tells them to, because they choose to, because it has become part of who they are. For most of her life, she believed love meant sacrifice. Now she understood something more. Love is also partnership, the kind that notices, the kind that shares, the kind that quietly says, "You do not have to carry this alone." Mom looked around the kitchen one last time, then smiled. Because families are not remembered for the mistakes they make. Every family makes those. They are remembered for what they choose to do once they finally see them. If this story stayed with you, leave the word together in the comments. And tell me, what is one lesson you believe every child should learn before becoming an adult? Because somebody reading your answer may need that lesson today. And before you go, remember this. The strongest relationships are not the ones where one person carries everything. They are the ones where nobody has to carry it all alone. Because when families face life together, they can survive almost anything. And that brings me to another story. One about 2 parents who lost almost everything. A job, their home, their sense of security, but not their determination to protect their children. So they did what many parents do when life falls apart. They smiled through the fear, called it an adventure, and hid a burden their children were never meant to see. If this story showed what happens when families learn to share life's weight, wait until you see what one family carried in silence just to keep hope alive. I will meet you there. I found the phone on a cold Tuesday afternoon in February while I was finally putting away Christmas decorations I had been avoiding for weeks. It was hidden inside an old toolbox in the garage, buried beneath a layer of rags that smelled like motor oil, dust, and years of neglect. When I unlocked it and saw the messages, saw her name, saw the photographs, I sat down on the cold concrete floor and realized that for 32 years I had been sleeping beside a man I did not know at all. The breaking did not happen that Tuesday. The breaking had been happening for years. I just had not been looking. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you are watching from today. Whether it is early morning, the middle of a busy day, or late at night when the world has finally gone quiet, I would love to know. And tell me something. Have you ever known someone who kept saying, I am fine. Even when you knew they were not, I read every comment, and I am always grateful for the time you spend here with me. Now, let me tell you what happened. My name is Margaret, and when this story begins, I am 54 years old. I have been married to Robert for 32 years. We have 3 children. Sophie is 31 and works in marketing in the city. James is 29 and teaches high school English 2 towns over. Lily is 17 and still lives at home with us. We own a 4-bedroom house with blue shutters on a street where everyone knows everyone else's business. Or at least they think they do. I work part-time at the library. Robert works in project management for a manufacturing company. On paper, we are ordinary. On paper, we are fine. I want to tell you that I saw the signs. I want to tell you that I knew something was wrong and fought to save him before everything shattered. But that would be a lie, and I have had enough of lies. The truth is that I saw the signs and explained them away. I saw the changes and told myself they were normal. I watched my husband become a stranger in small increments, and I convinced myself that this was simply what happened after 3 decades of marriage. People change. People get tired. People have bad years at work. I told myself all of this because the alternative was too frightening to consider. Some people do not leave your life all at once. They leave in pieces. A little presence today, a little honesty tomorrow, until one day all that remains is a familiar face carrying a stranger's heart. People imagine collapse as something dramatic. A single bad decision, one terrible night, one moment that changes everything. Real collapse is quieter. It arrives in inches, so slowly that by the time you notice it, the damage is already done. I think it started about 5 years before I found the phone. Robert came home from work one evening in March, and he was quiet. Not ordinary quiet, a different kind of quiet. The kind that sits heavy in a room and makes the air feel thicker. I was making dinner, chicken and rice. Something simple, because it had been a long day at the library and I was tired. He walked into the kitchen and set his briefcase down by the door. He always set it by the door. Then he would kiss me on the cheek and ask what was for dinner. That evening, he set the briefcase down and walked straight to the bedroom without saying a word. I turned off the stove and followed him. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with his hands folded in his lap, staring at the carpet. Robert, he looked up. His smile arrived a second too late. It was not his real smile. It was the smile people use when they are trying to convince someone everything is fine. I am fine, he said. Just a long day. Do you want to talk about it? Nothing to talk about. Just tired. I stood in the doorway and studied him. His shoulders curved forward. His shirt was wrinkled. There were shadows beneath his eyes that looked older than a single day. Are you sure? Margaret, I said, I am fine. There was an edge in his voice. Not anger. Exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. I nodded and returned to the kitchen. I told myself he was tired. I told myself it was work stress. I told myself it would pass. It did not pass. Over the following months, Robert became quieter. He started working later. He would call at 6 in the evening and say he had to finish a project. Then 6 became 9. 9 became 10. 10 became 11. When he came home, he ate whatever I had left in the microwave, took a shower, and went to bed. We stopped having conversations that lasted longer than 5 minutes. We stopped watching television together. We stopped making love. I noticed every one of those changes. I just did not know what to do with them. How do you ask someone why they are disappearing when they are still standing right in front of you? I tried once. It was a Saturday morning in June. Robert sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and staring at something on his phone. I sat across from him. Waited. He never looked up. Robert. Can we talk? About what? About us, I said. He finally looked up. His eyes looked tired. Everything about him looked tired. What about us? I feel like we have not really talked in months. He rubbed both hands over his face. I am busy, Margaret. You know that. I know you are busy. But this feels like more than busy. He sighed. I am just stressed. It feels like you are pulling away. I am not pulling away, Margaret. Then, what is happening? Nothing is happening. His voice remained calm, but there was a pleading quality underneath it, like he desperately wanted me to stop asking questions. I am tired. I am stressed. I am trying to keep everything together, and sometimes I do not have much left at the end of the day. Can you understand that? Because I loved him. I nodded. Because I loved him, I stopped pushing. Because I loved him, I gave him exactly what he wanted: space. The conversation ended. He picked up his phone. I picked up my coffee. Neither of us said another word, looking back. I understand something I did not understand then. Silence does not always arrive because people have nothing to say. Sometimes silence arrives because the truth feels too dangerous to speak aloud. Months passed, the distance grew. Neither of us knew how to cross it. Or perhaps only one of us was still trying. Sophie came home for a weekend visit in September. She had always been the most perceptive of our children, the one who could walk into a room and instantly sense what nobody was saying. She hugged me at the door, then looked past me into the house. Where is Dad? Still at work. He will be home soon. She frowned, said nothing. We made dinner together. Lily was with friends. James could not make it that weekend. The entire evening felt oddly quiet. Robert came home at 9:30. He looked surprised to see Sophie. I did not know you were coming. I told you 2 weeks ago. I must have missed it. He hugged her briefly and disappeared into the bedroom. Sophie watched him leave. Then she looked at me. Is he okay? He is fine. Just stressed. He does not look fine. I wanted to tell her the truth. The problem was that I did not know the truth. All I knew was that my husband felt increasingly unfamiliar. He is just tired. Sophie studied my face, then asked a question I did not expect. When did you and Dad meet? You know that story. Tell me anyway. I laughed softly. Why? Because I need to remember that you two were happy once. That answer hurt more than I expected. I leaned against the counter. We met at a bookstore. Her expression softened, and for the first time all evening, I smiled. We met at a bookstore. I repeated I was 22 years old. It was raining, and I had ducked inside to wait for the storm to pass. I was looking through a book about architecture when your father walked up beside me and asked if I was an architect or simply someone who appreciated beautiful structures. Sophie laughed. That sounds exactly like Dad. It was a terrible line. It really was, but he delivered it with so much confidence that I laughed instead of walking away. What happened after that? He asked me to have coffee with him when the rain stopped. And you said yes. I did. We sat in a little cafe for almost 4 hours. We talked about books, about travel, about family, about the lives we hoped to build someday. Your father told me he wanted children. Not just children. A family. A home where people felt safe. A place where nobody had to pretend to be someone they were not. I paused. The memory felt strangely distant, like it belonged to someone else. He meant it, Sophie said quietly. I know. So what happened? I did not have an answer. Not then, not yet. For a few moments neither of us spoke. The pasta simmered quietly on the stove. Outside, the last light of evening was fading. Sophie waited, not for an answer. For a memory, and somehow that felt easier, because I could still remember the good years. The years before distance and silence became permanent guests in our home. The years when loving Robert felt as natural as breathing. So I told her. Robert and I married 8 months after we met. Everyone told us it was too fast. My mother said I barely knew him. Maybe she was right. Maybe nobody ever truly knows another person. Not completely. Not forever. At the time, though, I was certain. Robert felt steady, Safe. The kind of man who made frightening things seem manageable simply because he was standing beside you. Our wedding was small. 30 people gathered in my parents' backyard. Robert wore a suit borrowed from his brother. I wore a dress I found in a consignment shop. Neither of us cared. We were too busy looking at each other. We wrote our own vows. I can still remember the way his voice shook. "Margaret," he said, "I promise to see you, not just look at you, but really see you. I promise to listen when you speak and hear what you are not saying. I promise to build a life with you where neither of us has to pretend to be anything other than exactly who we are." I believed every word. I smiled. Despite myself, "You know, when you were born, your father cried. Sophie's eyebrows lifted, Dad cried. I laughed softly, not quiet tears, deep, overwhelming sobs. He held you against his chest and kept whispering promises you were far too young to understand." What kind of promises? That he would protect you, that he would take care of you, that he would always be there for a moment. Sophie looked down at the counter, as though she was trying to picture it. Then another memory surfaced. When James arrived 2 years later, Robert spent endless nights walking the living room floor with him when he had colic. I would wake up at 2 in the morning and find Robert pacing slow circles through the dark house. "You should sleep," I would tell him. "You carried him for 9 months. The least I can do is carry him for a few hours." When Lily was born, he stood beside my hospital bed, holding our daughter's tiny hand. "You have given me everything I ever wanted," he said. "You do not have to thank me. This is ours. We built this together." He kissed my forehead. I will never forget that. For a long time, I believed he never would. Across the kitchen, Sophie was watching me carefully, listening to stories she had heard pieces of before. Stories that suddenly sounded different now, as though she was trying to reconcile the father she remembered with the man who now came home after dark and barely spoke. I understood the feeling. I had been trying to do the same thing for years. Moments that once seemed ordinary looked different now. Questions that once sounded casual felt heavier in hindsight. And there was one conversation I kept coming back to, one that made far more sense now than it did then. There was a night years later when Lily was 5. The children were asleep. Robert and I sat on the back porch drinking wine and watching fireflies drift through the darkness. Without warning, he reached for my hand. "Do you ever worry that we are going to mess this up?" "Mess what up? All of it. The marriage, the kids, this life," I laughed softly. "Everyone worries about that. I mean, really mess it up." His voice sounded unusually serious. "Wake up one day and realize we have been doing everything wrong, and now it is too late to fix it." I squeezed his hand. "We are not going to mess it up." "How do you know?" "Because we love each other. We love them. That matters." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You are right. At the time, I thought the conversation was over. Now I wonder if it was actually the beginning. Maybe that was the first crack. Maybe that was the first glimpse of the fear he never learned how to name. Maybe he was asking for help years before either of us realized it. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked what he was afraid of. Instead, I gave him reassurance. The easy kind. The comfortable kind. The kind that lets difficult conversations die before they begin. That is the thing about love when it has lasted a long time. You stop checking the foundation. You assume that because something was built strong, it will remain strong forever. You forget that even the strongest structures require maintenance, attention, care, honesty, someone willing to notice the cracks before they become fractures. Robert and I had years of beautiful moments. Vacations where we laughed until our stomachs hurt. Sunday mornings where we sat together reading the paper without needing to speak. Evenings spent planning futures that felt guaranteed. There were nights when he would wrap his arms around me afterward and say, "I am the luckiest man alive." I believed him. I believed our marriage was unbreakable. I understand now that nothing is unbreakable. Not marriages. Not families. Not people. Everything eventually breaks under enough pressure. Sometimes the pressure comes from the outside. Sometimes it comes from somewhere much closer: fear, shame, exhaustion, the quiet belief that you are failing at the one thing that matters most. Robert had always defined himself by his ability to provide, to protect, to carry the weight. That was not simply something he did. It was who he believed he was. When I met him, he was 24 years old and working his first serious job. He talked constantly about the future, about the life he intended to build, and for a long time, he succeeded. Promotions came, raises came, the house with the blue shutters came, college funds, family vacations, a life that looked successful from the outside. The problem with building your identity around being the strong one is that eventually strength becomes a prison. The moment you begin struggling, you no longer know who you are. You do not know how to ask for help. You do not know how to admit you are scared. You only know how to pretend, and pretending can become its own kind of addiction. One lie, then another, until eventually the performance becomes easier than the truth. I did not understand any of that back then. All I knew was that my husband was disappearing, and I did not know how to bring him back. Some betrayals happen in a single moment. A choice, a kiss, a lie. But the most dangerous betrayals are slower. They happen over years. In small silences, in conversations avoided, in fears left unspoken. In all the moments when someone stops choosing honesty and nobody notices until they are already gone. The next morning, Sophie found Robert making coffee in the kitchen. She sat at the table watching him. I could tell she had been thinking about something all night. Finally, she spoke. "Dad? Yeah. Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happy?" The question hung in the air. Robert stopped pouring coffee. For just a second, something passed across his face. Then, it disappeared. The familiar smile returned, the one that never reached his eyes. "Of course I am happy." "Then why do you seem sad all the time?" His shoulders tightened. "I am just getting older." "That is not what I mean." "What do you mean?" "I mean, it feels like something is wrong." He set the coffee pot down, harder than necessary. "I appreciate the concern, Sophie. But I am fine." "You do not seem fine." "I am tired." "You are always tired." The room went quiet. Finally, Robert sighed. I know, for a moment, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Then the smile returned. The mask slipped back into place, and the conversation ended. What none of us understood then was that people rarely collapse all at once. Most collapse happens quietly. A little hope today, a little energy tomorrow, a little honesty after that, until eventually the person you love is still standing in front of you, but the distance between who they are and who they pretend to be has become impossible to cross. And somewhere inside that growing distance, the future was already beginning to unravel. Sophie left on Sunday afternoon. Before she got into her car, she pulled me aside. "Mom, something is really wrong with Dad," I sighed. "He has been stressed." "No," her answer came immediately. "He is more than stressed." I folded my arms. "Sophie." "Mom, listen to me." There was something in her voice that made me stop. Not panic, not accusation, fear. The kind that comes when someone you love is slipping away and you do not know how to stop it. I talked to him. That surprised me. "You did," she nodded. "A few weeks ago, I thought maybe seeing him in person would make me feel better." She shook her head. It didn't. "What happened?" She looked toward the house, as though she could still see him standing there. "I called him." Her voice softened. I asked if he was okay. I already knew the answer. "He said he was fine." "Of course he did." A sad smile crossed her face. That was not the strange part. I waited. For a second, I thought he was going to tell me the truth. "What do you mean?" There was this pause. She frowned slightly, as though she were replaying the conversation. I asked if something was wrong. I told him he did not seem like himself, and for a moment her voice trailed away. For a moment he sounded tired, not physically tired, something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that settles into a person's soul. What happened then? The wall came back up, she shrugged. He told me everything was fine. He changed the subject. And that was it. The wind moved through the trees around us. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Sophie looked at me. Mom, have you noticed how different he is? I looked away, because I had the late nights, the distance, the silence, the way he seemed present physically but absent emotionally, all of it. He is under a lot of pressure. The words sounded weak even to me. Sophie studied my face, then nodded slowly, not because she agreed, because she knew she was not going to change my mind. I hope I am overreacting. So do I, she swallowed, but I do not think I am. Neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, uncertain, uncomfortable. Finally, she wrapped her arms around me. I love you, Mom. I love you too. Then she got into her car and drove away. I stood in the driveway long after she disappeared, watching the empty road, trying to convince myself she was wrong, trying to convince myself that what I was seeing was stress, exhaustion, work, anything but the growing feeling that something inside our family was quietly coming apart. Hope is a stubborn thing. It will keep rebuilding a bridge long after the other side has stopped crossing it. James came home for Thanksgiving. He had always been the quietest of our children. Sophie felt everything and said it. Lily felt everything and showed it. James felt everything and buried it. When he was little, he cried if Robert raised his voice even slightly. Not because Robert was harsh, he was not. James simply noticed things other people missed. The mood in a room, the tension beneath a conversation, the difference between what people said and what they meant. He learned very early how to read people. The problem was that children who learn to read people often learn to ignore themselves. That Thanksgiving, he barely spoke. He helped me cook. He set the table. He laughed when everyone else laughed, but there was a tension in him that never relaxed. Every time I looked up, I found him watching Robert, watching him the way someone watches a bridge they suspect might collapse. After dinner, I found him standing alone in the backyard. The trees were bare. The sky was gray. The air smelled like rain. James, he turned. Hey, Mom, what are you doing out here without a jacket? Just needed some air. I stepped beside him. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he asked a question I was not expecting. Are you okay? I frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Dad is falling apart. The words landed harder than they should have. He is stressed. No, James shook his head. He is more than stressed. I looked away. He continued. Mom, I think Dad is having an affair. My entire body went cold. What? I do not have proof. Then do not say things like that. I know, his voice remained calm. Too calm. But he did not back down. You can call it a feeling if you want. You can call it intuition. You can call it whatever makes it easier to hear. He looked at me, not angry, not emotional. Worried. I just know something is wrong. I swallowed hard. You cannot know that. Maybe not. His eyes drifted toward the house. Toward the man who had been his father his entire life. Then back to me. But look at him, Mom. The way he avoids eye contact, the way he guards his phone, the way he leaves the room to take calls, the way he looks exhausted all the time. James looked down at the grass. I have tried talking to him too. The admission surprised me. You have, he nodded, a few times. What did he say? The same thing he tells everyone. A humorless smile touched his face. That he is fine. The wind stirred the bare branches overhead. I told him he seemed unhappy. I told him he looked exhausted. I asked if something was wrong. His shoulders lifted slightly. He always found a way to change the subject. What did you think? For a moment he did not answer. Then I thought he looked tired of pretending. The words settled heavily between us. His voice softened. I hope I am wrong. I really do. But I do not think Dad can keep carrying whatever he is carrying much longer. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because the truth was that I had noticed those things too. I had simply refused to put them together. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved through the bare branches above us. Somewhere inside the house, I heard Lily laughing at something on television. The sound felt strangely distant. Part of me knew he might be right. The signs were there, the distance, the secrecy. The exhaustion, the growing feeling that something inside my marriage had shifted in a way I could no longer explain. And yet, I could not bring myself to believe it. Not fully. Not then, because after 32 years together, disbelief felt safer than truth. Every warning sign found an explanation. Every strange behavior found an excuse. Every doubt was pushed aside and replaced with another chance. Another benefit of the doubt. Another promise that things would get better. Hope is a stubborn thing. It will keep rebuilding a bridge long after the other side has stopped crossing it. James looked toward the house, toward the kitchen window glowing against the darkening sky. Then he nodded once, as though there was nothing more to say. He turned and walked back toward the house. I remained standing beneath the gray November sky, watching the last of the daylight fade, and wondering if I had been ignoring something far bigger than I was ready to admit. Sometimes the people who love us see the truth before we do. Not because they have evidence, because they have distance. Distance reveals cracks that proximity learns to ignore. I had spent years standing so close to Robert that I could no longer see him clearly. James stood farther away, and from where he stood, the collapse was obvious. I did not confront Robert after Thanksgiving. I told myself I needed proof. I told myself I did not want to accuse him unfairly, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid of what I would find. Afraid of what it would mean if James was right. So I waited. And while I waited, things got worse. Lily started having panic attacks in December. They came without warning. Usually at night, she would wake up unable to breathe. Certain she was dying. I would sit beside her bed and hold her hand until her breathing slowed. Eventually, I took her to a doctor. The doctor asked whether there was stress at home. I said no, even as I said it. I knew I was lying. The doctor suggested therapy. When I mentioned it to Robert, he dismissed the idea immediately. Therapy is for people who cannot handle their own problems, I wanted to argue. Instead, I nodded. Then I took Lily to therapy anyway. The therapist asked Lily what frightened her. Lily thought about it for a long time. Then she said something that still haunts me. I feel like something bad is about to happen. What kind of bad thing? I do not know. She looked down at her hands. It just feels like my family is breaking. The therapist looked at me. I looked away. Christmas arrived. We decorated the tree, wrapped presents, cooked dinner, took family photographs. From the outside, everything looked normal. But there was no joy inside any of it. Robert moved through the holiday like a ghost. He smiled when photographs were taken. He opened presents. He sat at the dinner table. But there was a distance in him that never seemed to close. Physically, he was with us. Emotionally, he felt miles away. Sophie watched him constantly. James barely spoke. Lily tried desperately to act cheerful, and every forced smile broke my heart. Late that Christmas night, after the house had finally grown quiet, Robert and I sat together in the living room. The tree lights glowed softly in the darkness. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. I stared at him. He stared at the tree. Finally, I asked the question that had been living inside me for months. Do you still love me? For a second, something flickered across his face. Pain, regret, fear. Then, it vanished. Of course I love you. Then why do I feel like I am losing you? He looked away. You are not losing me. Yes, I am, my voice cracked. You have not been here in months. His jaw tightened. I am tired. The words hit me harder than they should have because I had heard them for months. Every difficult conversation ended the same way. Every question, every concern, every attempt to reach him. I am tired. I shook my head. That is not an answer anymore. I am going to bed. Robert, please. His voice was barely above a whisper. I cannot do this tonight. Then he stood and walked away. I sat alone beside the Christmas tree and cried as quietly as possible so the children would not hear. Silence is dangerous. Not because it says nothing, because it creates space for damage to grow unnoticed. Looking back, that Christmas was the last chance we had to tell the truth before everything finally broke apart. January came. Then February, the distance between us became a living thing. Robert started sleeping in the den more often. He claimed he was working. Maybe sometimes he was. Maybe sometimes he was not. I stopped asking. That was my mistake. I thought avoiding conflict was preserving peace. What I was actually preserving was secrecy. 2 weeks later, I was finally putting away Christmas decorations I had shoved into the garage months earlier. I moved boxes, lifted old storage bins, and found an old toolbox beneath a stack of blankets. I do not know why I opened it. Maybe instinct knew before I did. At the bottom was a phone wrapped inside an old rag. I expected a password. There was none. Maybe he had stopped caring. Maybe he wanted to be caught. Maybe he was simply too exhausted to keep building walls. Whatever the reason, the phone opened. I opened the messages and found Diane. Hundreds of messages. Thousands of words. Entire pieces of my husband's. Life I had never seen. I love you. I miss you. I cannot wait to see you. When are you going to tell her? When are we going to stop hiding? I sat down on the garage floor and read everything. The beginning, the middle, the escalation, the lies, the promises, the affair. I watched my marriage unravel, one message at a time. It took nearly 2 hours. When I finally reached the last message, I lowered the phone into my lap and stared at nothing. Betrayal does not begin with a kiss. It begins with a secret, a private conversation, a truth handed to someone else, a burden shared with a stranger instead of a spouse. By the time another woman enters the story, the betrayal has already happened. Everything after that is just evidence. I carried the phone into the house. Robert was in the den, working on his laptop or pretending to. I placed the phone on the desk. He looked at it. Then at me. The color drained. From his face, Margaret, do not. I raised one finger. The words died before they reached his lips. Tell me the truth. He stared at the phone. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he whispered. It is all true. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I needed confirmation, because hearing it out loud made it real. My voice sounded distant, almost unfamiliar. How long? His eyes closed. 6 months. The air seemed to leave the room. 6 months. I repeated the words slowly. 6 months. 180 days. Thousands of lies. Thousands of choices. 6 whole months. My voice sounded unfamiliar. It was not like that. I stared at him. Then, what was it like, Robert? For the first time in years, he had nowhere left to hide. He looked down at the desk, then stood and walked toward the window. His back remained turned to me. I did not plan it. The words sounded weak even to him. I did not go looking for an affair. That is not an answer. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. I know. I met her at a conference in October. There it was, the beginning. Not the lie. The truth, or at least part of it. She worked with one of our partner companies. We talked during a break. Then we talked again, and eventually we started having coffee together. He stopped. The silence stretched. And then, I asked. His head lowered, and then I started telling her things. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes pain comes out sounding like laughter. You started telling her things. It was not a question, yes. What kinds of things? The things I should have been telling you. Something twisted inside my chest. What things, Robert? My fears, my stress, my exhaustion, the money problems, the job, the pressure. He finally turned around. His eyes were red. Not from crying. From carrying something too long. I was drowning, Margaret. I folded my arms, drowning in what? Everything. He sank into a chair. For the first time since I had entered the room, he looked defeated. Not guilty. Defeated? The pressure, the fear, the feeling that I was failing everyone. Every word felt raw, like something dragged into daylight after years in the dark. You never told me. No, you let me believe everything was fine. Yes, you let me plan for Lilith's college. You let me believe our future was secure. His voice cracked. I did. Silence settled between us. Heavy, uncomfortable, necessary. I thought I could fix it. His eyes dropped to the floor. Every month I told myself I just needed a little more time, a better contract, a better quarter, a better opportunity. I thought I could solve it before anyone noticed. And when you could not, he laughed bitterly. Then I lied some more. I looked at him. Really looked at him. For years I had been watching him pull away, the late nights, the silence, the exhaustion, the growing distance between us. I had seen all of it. I just never imagined it would lead here. Never imagined another woman standing in the middle of our marriage. I kept asking what was wrong. My voice trembled. I kept giving you chances to tell me. Robert looked away. I know, no, I shook my head. You do not. Tears blurred my vision because if you understood, you would know. This is not just about her. His eyes lifted to mine. This is about every time you looked me in the eye and lied. Every message, every excuse, every late night, every moment I defended you when people asked if something was wrong. All of it came rushing back at once. I do not even know what is real anymore. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and judging by the look on Robert's face, they hurt more than anything else I had said. His eyes closed, as though the weight of those words had landed somewhere he could not defend against. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy, uncomfortable, filled with everything that had been broken. When he finally looked up, there was no anger in his face, no excuses, no attempt to explain himself. Only regret. You are right. His voice was quiet. I lied to you. I chose every message. I chose every meeting. I chose every excuse. I chose every lie. He swallowed hard. You should hate me. Part of me wanted to. Part of me already did. But hatred was not the emotion sitting in my chest. Not anymore. What I felt was grief. Grief for the marriage I thought I had. Grief for the man he used to be. Grief for the years we had spent standing beside each other while somehow becoming strangers. Do you love her? The question hung between us. Robert closed his eyes. A long silence followed. Then, I do not know. I nodded, because the hesitation itself was an answer. I love you, his voice broke. I know that sounds impossible, but I do. I have always loved you. Then why did you stop choosing me? He looked away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, the truth arrived. Quietly, like most devastating things do, because I stopped believing I was enough. The room went silent. I had expected excuses. I had expected blame. I had expected manipulation. Instead, I got honesty. Late, painfully late. But honesty all the same. When I looked at you, all I saw was everything I was failing to give you. When I looked at the kids, I saw college tuition, mortgage payments, bills, responsibilities. I felt like I was letting everyone down. So instead of telling us, you disappeared. His eyes filled. Yes. I closed mine, because that answer hurt more than the affair. That was the part that hurt most, not the hotel, not the messages, not even the words I love you. The deepest wound was realizing that my husband had been suffering beside me and decided a stranger was safer than his wife. He trusted someone he barely knew with burdens he never allowed me to carry. I would have helped you. The words came out barely above a whisper. If you had told me, his eyes dropped, because there was nothing he could say. We both knew it was true. Tears blurred my vision. You never gave me the chance. You decided for me. You decided I could not handle your truth. You decided I would think less of you. You decided I would leave." His face crumpled, and suddenly he looked older than I had ever seen him. I was terrified. I did not know how to be weak. "Then you should have learned," he nodded, "because there was no defense left. Only consequences. Only truth. Only damage." We stood there for a long time. Neither of us moving. Neither of us pretending anymore. Finally, I picked up the phone. The same phone that had destroyed 32 years of certainty. And I looked at him one last time. "What happens now?" I asked. Robert stared at the floor. For several seconds, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not know." For once, neither did I. The silence stretched between us. Then he lifted his eyes to mine. "Do you want me to leave?" I stared at him. The man who had held my hand through childbirth, the man who had sat beside me at funerals, the man who had built a life with me, and then hidden another life inside it. Yes. The word felt like breaking glass. His eyes closed. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he simply nodded. 10 minutes later, I heard his car leave the driveway. I stood alone in the den and felt 32 years collapse around me. You do not know what you are made of until something breaks you. And even then, you are not really sure whether you are rebuilding yourself or simply rearranging the pieces into a shape that can survive. The next day, I called the children, all of them. I asked them to come home. Sophie arrived first. Then James Lily came downstairs after hearing their voices. The four of us sat together in the living room. No one spoke. Everyone already knew something was wrong. "Your father and I are separating." Sophie's eyes closed, as though the confirmation hurt even more than the suspicion. For months, she had feared something was wrong. Now she finally knew what it was. James lowered his head, not surprised, just devastated, as though hearing the truth out loud somehow made it more real. Lily looked from face to face, confused. Afraid, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. "What happened?" Her voice shook. I looked at my children and hated what I was about to do to them. "Your father has been having an affair." The room fell silent. Not ordinary silence. The kind that changes people. "Oh my God," Sophie's voice broke. James pressed a hand against his mouth. Lily stared at me, as though waiting for me to take the words back, to tell her she had misunderstood. To tell her it was not true. "It is true." I watched the realization spread across her face, and hated that I could not protect her from it. The hardest part of betrayal is not the moment you discover it. It is all the moments afterward, the mornings when you wake up and remember it is real. The empty chair at the table, the silence where a familiar voice used to be, the sudden realization that every plan you made was built on information that no longer exists. For the first few days, I moved through life on autopilot. I went to work. I answered questions. I made dinner. I folded laundry. I smiled when people spoke to me. And all the while, it felt as though my life had continued moving forward without my permission. Robert called several times. I ignored every call on the 5th day. I answered. "What do you want?" His voice sounded exhausted. "I need to talk to you. You had months to talk to me." The line went quiet for a moment. I thought he might argue, defend himself, offer another explanation. Instead, when he finally spoke, his voice sounded worn down to nothing. "You are right." Silence settled between us. Then, "Please, Margaret, just my name, nothing else. No excuses, no defense. Just a man standing in the ruins of his own choices asking for one last chance to be heard." I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me never wanted to hear his voice again. But another part wanted answers, needed them. And in the end, that part won. 1 hour. The breath he released sounded almost painful. "Thank you. Maple Street Diner." Another pause. "Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. I will be there." The line went dead before he could say anything more, and for the next 24 hours, I hated myself for looking forward to hearing what he had to say. Because anger had answered some of my questions, but not all of them. The next afternoon, he was already waiting when I arrived. He looked terrible. His clothes hung loosely on him. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. He looked like someone who had not slept in weeks. Maybe he had not. I slid into the booth. A waitress brought coffee. Then left us alone. Neither of us touched our cups. Talk. Robert stared out the window, then finally spoke. The first salary cut happened almost 2 years ago. I frowned. What salary cut? Robert looked down at his hands. For several seconds, he said nothing. The diner hummed around us. Silverware clinked against plates. People laughed at nearby tables. Ordinary life continued while ours sat in pieces between us. The company has been struggling for a long time, he said. It was supposed to be temporary. I stared at him. You never told me. No, I did not. Why? He laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes shame sounds like laughter, because I thought I could fix it before it mattered. I folded my arms. It mattered, Robert. His eyes stayed fixed on the table. No matter how much it was, it mattered. The silence stretched between us. Then he continued. The first month I told myself it would be reversed. The second month I told myself new contracts were coming. The third month I started moving money around. What money? The savings account. I felt my stomach tighten. The college fund. His face crumpled. Some of it. For a moment I could not speak. The betrayal somehow felt different from the affair. Not bigger. Not smaller. Just different. You touched Lily's college fund. I replaced some of it. Some? Not all. I closed my eyes, because every answer seemed to reveal another secret. Another hidden room inside a house I thought I knew. I kept thinking I was 1 good month away from fixing everything. His voice trembled. Then 1 month became 6. 6 became 12. And suddenly, I was spending all my energy trying to hide how bad things had become. Eventually, he looked up. For a moment, he seemed to be deciding how much truth he could survive telling. Then he said it. My salary was cut nearly 40%. The number hit me like a punch. Nearly half. Nearly half of the income our family depended on. Nearly half of the future we thought we had. There is more, he said quietly. Of course there was. There always was. When did you realize the company was not recovering? Robert rubbed his forehead. About 8 months ago. The answer surprised me. That long. He nodded. That was when I realized the contracts were not coming back. The cuts were continuing, and for the first time, I could not see a way out. And the mortgage. His eyes closed briefly. We started falling behind about 5 months ago. 5 months. 5 months of notices. 5 months of fear. 5 months of secrets. The bank started foreclosure proceedings last month. The words settled between us. Heavy. Permanent. Impossible to take back. For a moment neither of us spoke. The numbers alone felt impossible to absorb. But the financial damage was only part of what sat between us. You should have trusted me. His eyes dropped. I was afraid. We could have faced it together. His jaw tightened. I see that now. We might have saved the house. The pain on his face answered before he did. Maybe we could have. Maybe we could not have. Neither of us would ever know. The coffee sat untouched between us, growing colder with every passing minute. The silence stretched between us. Outside, cars passed. People moved through ordinary afternoons, completely unaware that an entire life was coming apart inside a booth at the Maple Street diner. After a long moment, Robert spoke again. I never stopped loving you. I laughed bitterly. That statement has lost a lot of value recently. He nodded slowly. I suppose it has. Then he looked out the window, watching strangers move through lives that had nothing to do with ours. Diane met me after the damage was already done. I said nothing. She never knew the version of me who could handle everything. She never knew the version of me who paid every bill. She never knew the version of me who always had answers. He rubbed his eyes. She met the broken version, the scared version, the version that woke up every morning convinced he was failing. His voice cracked, and she did not seem disappointed. I looked at him and suddenly understood something terrible. Diane had not stolen his affection. She had inherited his vulnerability. The part he should have been sharing with me, the part he was too frightened to bring home. I studied him. The man sitting across from me was not arrogant, not defensive, not manipulative. He looked broken, completely broken, and somehow that made everything worse. Because villains are easier to leave than wounded people. I do not know if I can forgive you. His eyes dropped. I understand. I do not know if I even want to. The words seemed to hit him physically. He swallowed hard. I understand that too, but I need you to hear something. He nodded once. You did not just betray me with the affair. You betrayed me by deciding I could not handle the truth. His eyes closed. You decided for me. You decided I was too fragile. You decided I was not strong enough to stand beside you. Tears slipped down his face, and that hurts more than Diane. He covered his eyes. For a long moment. Neither of us spoke. Then I stood. I need time. He lowered his hands and nodded. I understand. Do not call me. His jaw tightened. Okay, do not come to the house. Another nod. I will not. When I am ready to talk, I will let you know. His eyes remained fixed on the table. I will wait. I looked at him for a moment, then turned and walked away. I left him sitting there, alone. And for the first time in 32 years, I drove away from my husband without knowing if I would ever come back. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is not the person who hurt you. Sometimes it is yourself. Not for what you did, for what you failed to see. A week later, I visited my mother. Rose was 78 years old and possessed the rare ability to make truth sound unavoidable. She listened while I told her everything. The affair, the lies, the mortgage, the financial collapse, the shame, the silence. She never interrupted, never rushed me, never offered advice before I was finished. When I finally stopped talking, she poured tea into 2 chipped ceramic cups and sat across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she asked a question I had been avoiding. Was he always this afraid? I blinked. What? Your husband. She stirred her tea slowly. Was he always this afraid? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped, because the answer arrived faster than I wanted it to. Yes. Robert had always worried, always carried responsibility, always believed it was his job to hold everything together, even when nobody had asked him to, even when the burden was crushing him. I thought about all the years I had watched him pace the house after everyone went to bed. The way he checked bank accounts, the way he worried about college tuition before the children were even old enough to drive, the way he carried every setback as though it were a personal failure. I had spent years admiring that part of him, respecting it, trusting it. I had simply mistaken fear for strength. My mother nodded slowly. That is the trouble with people like Robert. I frowned. What do you mean? They spend so much time protecting everyone from their fears that eventually nobody knows they are afraid. She lifted her cup. Not even themselves. The words settled heavily between us, because I could see the truth in them. Robert had spent decades convincing everyone he was strong. Maybe he had convinced himself too. My mother took a sip of tea, then looked directly at me. Fear wears a lot of disguises. I looked down at my hands, and silence is one of them. The room grew quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Somewhere in the house, an old clock ticked. That sentence stayed with me, because deep down I knew she was right. For years I had viewed Robert's silence as stubbornness, as pride, as emotional distance. Now I wondered how much of it had been fear. Fear of failure, fear of disappointing us, fear of admitting he could not carry everything alone. And for the first time since finding the phone, I began to wonder whether the affair had been the end of the story, or simply the symptom of something that had been breaking inside Robert for years. A week later, the phone rang. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor from 2 houses down. Her voice was trembling. Margaret. Immediately, my stomach dropped. What happened? There are ambulances at Robert's apartment. Everything inside me froze. I think you should come. I do not remember grabbing my keys. I do not remember the drive. I only remember seeing flashing lights. Paramedics, police cars, a stretcher, and Robert, a paramedic, stopped me before I reached him. Are you Margaret? Yes. He asked us to call you. My chest tightened. What happened? He took a bottle of sleeping pills. The world tilted. We got here in time. The words barely registered. Alive. He was alive. That was all I cared about. In that moment, none of the anger mattered. None of the unanswered questions. None of the betrayal. The only thing that mattered was that he was still alive. They let me ride in the ambulance. Robert opened his eyes once. Just once. When he saw me, tears slid down his face. I am sorry. The words were almost inaudible. I took his hand and held on. At the hospital, they admitted him immediately. The next morning, I sat beside his bed. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Emotionally, like every defense he had ever built had finally collapsed. Why? The question came out before I could stop it. He stared at the blanket. For a long time. Then, because I could not see a way forward, I said nothing. He continued. I thought everyone would be better off without me. No, it felt true. His voice broke. I know it does not make sense. He stared at the blanket. But when you live with those thoughts long enough, they start sounding like facts. Tears filled my eyes. How long have you been carrying this alone? He laughed bitterly. I do not know. A few years. Maybe 5. Maybe longer. The room fell silent. Then the truth finally began to surface. Not all at once. Not neatly. Just fragments. Pieces of a struggle I had never fully seen. I wake up every morning exhausted. He stared at the floor. I go to bed exhausted. I spend all day pretending. Pretending I am okay. Pretending I am strong. Pretending I know what I am doing. His voice cracked. And I am tired. Not ordinary tired. Soul tired. The kind of exhaustion sleep cannot touch. I moved closer, and for the first time since finding the phone, the affair stopped being the first thing I saw. I still saw the lies. I still saw the betrayal, but I saw something else too. A man who had spent years carrying something he never talked about. Something I still did not fully understand. That did not excuse the affair. It did not erase the lies, but it explained why the man sitting in front of me looked nothing like the husband I had known. And for the first time, I realized there were parts of his struggle I had never seen at all. Why did you choose her? He cried before answering, because he already knew there was no answer that would not hurt. She did not know who I was supposed to be. His voice trembled. With her, I could just be broken. I looked away, because I finally understood, and understanding can hurt almost as much as betrayal. I sat beside Robert's hospital bed for a long time after that. Neither of us spoke. Some truths arrive with noise. Others arrive quietly. This one settled between us like dust after a collapse. Not dramatic, not explosive, just unavoidable. Later that afternoon, one of the physicians caring for Robert stopped by his room. His name was Dr. Harris. He reviewed Robert's chart, asked several questions, and spent a long time talking with him privately. When he finished, he turned to me. I would like one of our psychiatric specialists to evaluate him. The words made my stomach tighten. Not because I disagreed, because hearing them out loud made everything feel more serious, more real. I nodded. A few hours later, I was sitting in a small consultation room on the psychiatric floor. The psychiatrist introduced herself as Dr. Reynolds. She looked to be in her early 60s. Calm, direct. The kind of person who had spent years walking people through disasters. After reviewing Robert's history, speaking with him at length, and reading the hospital notes, she folded her hands and looked at me. Robert is suffering from severe major depression, she said. I stared at her. The diagnosis sounded both shocking and obvious, like finally seeing the answer to a puzzle that had been sitting in front of me the entire time. How long? She folded her hands. It is difficult to know exactly, but based on what he has shared, several years. Several years, I repeated. The words sound strange, even to me. Several years of exhaustion. Several years of fear. Several years of pretending. Several years of suffering in silence, while all of us mistook survival for stability. For months, I had believed another woman had stolen my husband. That was the story I told myself. The story that made the most sense. But sitting there, listening to Dr. Reynolds describe years of depression, I realized the truth was more complicated than that. Depression reached him first. Shame reached him second. Diane arrived third. Affairs often look like the disaster. Sometimes they are only the smoke. The fire had already been burning long before anyone noticed the heat. That realization did not lessen my anger. It did not erase the betrayal, but it changed the shape of it. Because suddenly I was no longer looking at a man who had simply made terrible choices. I was looking at a man who had been quietly disappearing for years, and nobody had stopped him. Not even me, especially not me. Why did he not ask for help? Dr. Reynolds gave a sad smile. Many people with depression do not realize how sick they are, and many men are taught that asking for help means failure. I thought about Robert, the man who believed strength meant carrying everything alone, the man who would rather collapse than admit he was struggling, and suddenly I understood something painful. The very qualities that had made him dependable had also made him vulnerable. The same pride that helped him provide for his family had prevented him from saving himself. Can he get better? Dr. Reynolds nodded. Yes, but it will take work. Therapy, medication, honesty, support, and accountability. That last word caught my attention. Accountability. She nodded. Depression explains behavior. It does not excuse behavior. Recovery requires both compassion and responsibility. I appreciated that because I was tired of hearing people explain away bad choices. What Robert had done mattered. The affair mattered. The lies mattered. The pain he caused mattered. His illness explained those things. It did not erase them. When I returned to his room, he was staring out the window. For the first time in years, he looked strangely peaceful. Not happy, not healed. Just no longer hiding. Dr. Reynolds talked to me. He nodded. She talked to me too. We sat quietly. Then I asked the question that had been living inside me. Did you ever think about telling me? His eyes filled immediately. Every day, I looked at him. What stopped you? His laugh was hollow. Fear. Fear of what? Everything. He rubbed his eyes. I was afraid you would look at me differently. I was afraid the kids would lose respect for me. I was afraid you would realize I was not the man you thought I was. I swallowed hard, Robert. Nobody expects perfection. I did. The answer came instantly, without hesitation, as if he had rehearsed it 1,000 times. I expected perfection. The room fell silent, because there it was, the real enemy. Not Diane, not money, not even depression, perfection, the impossible standard he had chained himself to for decades. I thought if I worked harder, I could fix everything. He laughed bitterly, and when I could not fix it, I stopped talking about it. When that did not work, I lied. When that did not work, I withdrew. When that did not work, I found an escape, and when that stopped working, his voice broke. I knew how the sentence ended. Neither of us needed to say it. A few days later, Robert was transferred to the psychiatric unit. The first time I walked through those locked doors, I felt terrified. Not because of the patients, because of what it represented. Final proof that something had been deeply wrong for a very long time. The staff encouraged family visits. So I came every day. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we sat quietly. Sometimes we cried, and slowly something began to happen. For the first time in years, Robert started telling the truth. Not pieces of it, all of it. The ugly parts, the embarrassing parts, the parts he had spent decades hiding. He told me about his father, a man who believed men did not cry, men did not complain, men did not ask for help, They worked, provided, endured. Anything else was weakness. I spent my entire life trying to earn approval from someone who died 20 years ago. The realization seemed to shock him, as though he had never said it aloud before. I kept trying to prove I was enough. His eyes drifted toward the window, and no matter what I accomplished, it never felt like enough. I listened, because after 32 years of marriage, I realized there were entire parts of my husband I had never met. Not because he had hidden them maliciously, because he had hidden them from himself. One afternoon, he looked at me and asked a question. "Do you think I am a bad person?" The question broke my heart, because it sounded like something a frightened child would ask. I thought about the affair, the lies, the secrecy, the pain. Then I thought about the years of depression, the fear, the shame, the self-hatred. And I answered honestly. No tears filled his eyes. "I think you are a hurting person. You made terrible choices. You hurt a lot of people. But no, I do not think you are a bad person." He cried harder than I had ever seen him cry. Not when we got married, not when the children were born, not when his father died. Nothing compared to that moment, because sometimes forgiveness begins long before reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness begins the moment someone finally believes they are still worth saving. 3 weeks later, Robert was discharged. The doctors adjusted his medication, set up therapy appointments, created a safety plan, connected him with support groups. For the first time in years, there was a roadmap, not a guarantee, but a direction. The children came home the day before his discharge, all 3 of them. We sat together in the living room. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "When does Dad come home?" "Tomorrow," she nodded. Then looked at me. "Are you taking him back?" I hesitated, because I genuinely did not know. I do not have that answer yet. Sophie stared at the floor. "I am angry. I know. I am angry about the affair. I am angry about the lies. I am angry that he tried to leave us." Tears filled her eyes. "I am angry that he made Mom carry all of this." Nobody argued, because everything she said was true. James spoke next. I knew something was wrong. His voice was barely above a whisper. I knew for months. He looked miserable. I should have said something. No, the word came out stronger than I intended. James looked up. "None of this is your responsibility." But, no, I leaned forward. "You were his son, not his therapist, not his parent, not his rescuer." His eyes filled with tears, because I think part of him had been carrying that guilt for years, even before the affair, even before the hospital. Finally, Lily spoke, the youngest, the most fragile, the one whose heart had shattered the hardest. "Is he going to do it again?" Nobody answered immediately, because nobody could. The truth was complicated. Recovery came with hope, not certainty. Then I remembered something Dr. Reynolds had said: people heal best when truth is spoken plainly. So I answered honestly, "I do not know." Lily's eyes widened. "But I do know this. He is getting help. He is taking medication. He is in therapy. He has people watching out for him, and he is not carrying everything alone anymore." Lily nodded slowly. Not reassured, but listening. Sometimes hope does not arrive as confidence. Sometimes it arrives as willingness. Willingness to try again. Willingness to believe healing might be possible. Willingness to stay in the room when leaving would be easier. The next day, Robert came home. Not as the man who left, not as the man who betrayed us, not even as the man who tried to die. He came home as someone finally learning how to live honestly. And all of us were about to discover whether honesty could rebuild what silence had destroyed. The first few weeks after Robert came home were awkward, not hostile, not angry, just unfamiliar. We had spent 32 years learning how to live together. Now we were learning how to live together honestly. And it turned out those were very different things. Robert moved into the guest room. Neither of us suggested otherwise. The marriage still existed, technically, but trust did not. Trust had been shattered, and broken things do not become whole simply because people want them to. They become whole because people do the work. Day after day, choice after choice, truth after truth. 3 months after he came home, Robert lost a contract opportunity he had been counting on. The old Robert would have hidden it, buried it, pretended everything was fine. Instead, he walked into the kitchen and sat down beside me. I got bad news. I looked up immediately, not because of the news, because he was telling me, before I asked, before I discovered it, before it became another secret. He stared at the table for a moment, then added quietly, "And today is hard." The words hung between us, simple, honest, uncomfortable, real. I sat down beside him. What is making it hard? I woke up feeling like a failure. The honesty startled me, not because of what he said, because of how easily he said it, as though speaking the truth had finally become less frightening than hiding it. For nearly an hour we talked about finances. Fear, disappointment, reality, no lies, no hiding, no pretending. When the conversation ended, I realized something. Trust was not returning because he was perfect. Trust was returning because he was finally honest when things were not. The affair had destroyed our marriage, but honesty was building something new. Not better, not worse, just real. Sophie remained angry the longest. She visited every weekend. At first, her conversations with Robert lasted only a few minutes. She kept emotional distance between them, a protective wall, and honestly, she had earned that wall. One afternoon, about 2 months after his discharge, I walked into the backyard and found them sitting together, talking. Actually talking. No tension, no arguments, just conversation. I stayed inside because some healing needs privacy. Later that evening, Sophie sat beside me on the porch. "I do not know if I forgive him." "You do not have to decide that yet." She nodded, then stared into the darkness. "I think I am starting to understand him." That sentence mattered more than forgiveness, because understanding creates possibility. Forgiveness sometimes follows later. That did not mean she trusted him again. It meant she had stopped seeing him as a villain, and that mattered too. James changed in quieter ways. His healing was harder to see. Sophie carried her pain outward. Lily carried hers through anxiety. James carried his inward, the way he always had. A few months after Robert came home, James invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. We sat in a small sandwich shop halfway between our towns. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work, weather, traffic, the kinds of conversations people have when they are trying to avoid the real conversation. Then, without warning, he set down his drink. "I am angry," I blinked. James almost never talked about anger. "At your father?" He shook his head. "At everyone." The answer surprised me. "What do you mean?" His eyes stayed on the table. "I spent my whole life trying not to make things harder for people." "I said nothing," he continued. "When Dad was stressed, I stayed quiet. When money was tight, I stayed quiet. When everybody else was upset, I stayed quiet." His voice trembled. I thought that was what good sons did. Something inside me broke, because I suddenly realized how much of his childhood I had misunderstood. "You were a child." "I know, but I did not feel like one." His eyes filled. "I felt responsible. For Dad. For you. For Lily. For Sophie. For everyone." The words came faster now. Years of pressure finally finding an exit. I spent my whole life trying to make myself smaller, so nobody would have to carry me. I reached across the table, took his hand. "You should never have felt that way." His smile was sad, but I did. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered something that still stays with me. "I do not know who I am when I am not taking care of everyone else." And suddenly, I understood. The damage had never belonged to one person alone. What happened to our family had exposed wounds in all of us. Different wounds, but wounds all the same. That realization stayed with me long after lunch ended, and over the following months, I began seeing small signs of healing in places I never expected. One afternoon, James arrived unexpectedly. Robert was in the garage organizing tools. James stood there awkwardly for a moment, then finally spoke. I started therapy. Robert stared at his son for a long moment, then set down the wrench he was holding. How is it going? James laughed nervously. I cry more than I expected. To my surprise, Robert laughed too, so do I. For the first time, both of them smiled. Not because anything was funny, because honesty can be strangely comforting. I keep realizing things. James leaned against the workbench. Like what? Like how much time I spent managing everybody else's emotions. Robert's smile disappeared, because he knew exactly where that came from. I taught you that. James looked up. No, you showed me that. The distinction mattered. One was intentional. The other was inherited. Robert looked down at the concrete floor, and for the first time in his life, I think he truly understood the cost of his silence. A moment later, he looked back up, then smiled. A real smile. The kind I had not seen in years. Good, I do not really know what I am doing. Neither do I. James laughed. So that makes two of us. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, not exactly as father and son, more like two men trying to learn skills they should have been taught decades earlier. How to ask for help, how to admit fear, how to stop carrying everything alone. Watching them felt like watching a cycle break, and some cycles deserve to be broken. Lily's healing took longer. One afternoon during family therapy, Dr. Chen asked her a question. What are you most angry about? Lily frowned. I am not angry, Dr. Chen smiled gently. Everyone says that before they answer. The room laughed softly, even Lily. Then the smile disappeared, and the truth arrived. I am angry because nobody told me. The room became quiet. I knew something was wrong. Her eyes filled. I kept asking. I kept feeling it. She looked at Robert, and everybody kept telling me I was imagining things. Robert's face crumpled. Because she was right. We had, all of us, every single one of us, we had sensed the collapse, and then spent years convincing ourselves it was not happening. I felt crazy. Lily wiped her eyes. I thought something was wrong with me. My heart broke because she was describing exactly what so many children experience. They notice the tension, the fear, the distance. But the adults keep denying it. And eventually the children stop trusting themselves. Dr. Chen nodded. That happens a lot. Lily looked confused. What does, when adults hide reality from children? Dr. Chen folded her hands. The children still feel the reality. The sentence landed on all of us because it was true. Children do not need perfect parents. They need honest ones. The panic attacks continued for months. Not as often, but often enough. Family therapy helped. Individual therapy helped. Time helped. One evening, nearly 6 months after Robert returned home, Lily sat across from him at the dinner table. Dad? Yeah? Are you okay today? The question froze everyone, because once upon a time that question would have been dangerous. Once upon a time the answer would have been automatic. I am fine. But this time, Robert thought about it. Actually thought about it. Then answered honestly. I am struggling a little today. Lily nodded. Do you want to talk about it? I think I do. And just like that, something changed. Not because the problem disappeared, because honesty had become normal. That was the moment I finally believed we might survive this. Not because nobody was hurting, because nobody was hiding. There is a difference. The foreclosure process did not happen overnight. Once Robert's finances were finally out in the open, we met with attorneys, financial advisors, and the bank. For the first time, we stopped hiding from reality and started dealing with it. The numbers were brutal. Even after restructuring debts and cutting expenses, keeping the house was no longer realistic. We had a choice. Wait for the bank to take it, or sell it ourselves while we still could. Just under a year after I found the phone, we made the decision to sell the house. The blue shutters, the porch, the bedrooms where we raised our children, the kitchen where birthdays had been celebrated, the backyard where summer evenings seemed endless. Losing it hurt, more than I expected. For weeks, I felt like I was grieving another death. But the truth was simple. The house had become a monument to a life we could no longer afford, and holding on to monuments can prevent you from building futures. We moved into a smaller house. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive. Just enough. The day we moved in, Robert stood in the empty living room. This feels like failure. I looked around, then shook my head. No, what does it feel like? It feels honest. For the first time in a long time, he smiled. And I realized honesty was slowly changing both of us. Not just him, me too. I started therapy, something I should have done years earlier. At first I thought therapy would focus on Robert, his depression, his affair, his choices. Instead, my therapist kept bringing the conversation back to me. Why had I ignored my instincts? Why had I accepted silence? Why had I spent years protecting everyone's comfort at the expense of truth? The answers were uncomfortable. I had spent most of my life being a peacekeeper, a fixer, a smoother of rough edges. Conflict made me anxious. Confrontation made me uncomfortable. So whenever something felt wrong, I minimized it, explained it away, told myself everything would work out. The problem was that avoidance is not peace. It is postponement. Eventually, every ignored problem collects interest, and one day, the bill arrives. Mine certainly had. About 18 months after Robert came home, we started couples therapy. Not because everything was fixed, because it was not. There were still wounds, still resentment, still questions, still grief. But there was also effort, and effort matters. One evening after a therapy session, Robert and I sat in the car long after we arrived home. Neither of us moved. Finally, he spoke. I still do not understand why you stayed. I looked out the windshield. The answer came slowly. I did not stay because of the affair. He frowned. What does that mean? It means if the affair was the whole story, I would have left. He stared at me. I continued. I stayed because I finally saw what was underneath it. The depression, the shame, the fear, the loneliness I swallowed. And because I saw something else? What? A man trying to change. The tears came immediately. For both of us. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind that arrive when something true finally gets spoken aloud. We sat there holding hands. Neither pretending, neither hiding, just two broken people trying to build something honest. One evening, nearly 2 years after the hospital, I realized Robert had been sleeping in our bedroom again for months. Not because we had made some grand decision, not because there had been a dramatic conversation. Somewhere along the way, the guest room had simply stopped being necessary. Healing had arrived quietly, the way most important things do. Recovery is not a straight line. There were setbacks. Hard days. Arguments, moments when old habits returned, moments when trust felt impossible, moments when forgiveness felt unfair. But there were also victories, small ones, important ones. A difficult conversation that actually happened, a panic attack survived, a therapy breakthrough, a truth spoken instead of hidden. Healing rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in moments, and those moments slowly become a life. 2 years after the hospital, Robert asked a question. We were sitting on the porch, different house, different lives, same kind of evening. Do you think we are going to make it? I laughed softly. The question sounded familiar, like another conversation from years ago, the night of the fireflies, the night he asked whether we would mess everything up. I took his hand. I do not know. He smiled. Fair answer. Then I squeezed his hand. But I think we are finally building something worth saving. For the first time in a very long time, neither of us looked away. 3 years after I found the phone, our family gathered for Sophie's daughter's 2nd birthday. The house was crowded, children running through the hallways, laughter echoing from room to room, too much food, too much noise, exactly the way family gatherings should be. I stood in the kitchen watching everyone, Sophie laughing with Robert, James talking openly about therapy, Lily home from college, confident, strong, passionate about psychology, passionate about helping people who felt invisible. Robert walked up beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked around the room and smiled. You know what is strange? What for years, I thought my job was protecting everyone from the truth. I nodded slowly. I think we all did. I nearly destroyed everything because of it. His voice was quiet. But the truth was the thing that saved us. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man standing beside me was not the man I married, and I was not the woman he married. Life had changed us. Pain had changed us. Truth had changed us. But perhaps that was not entirely a bad thing. Some people spend their entire lives pretending they are fine, pretending they are stronger than they really are, pretending fear does not exist, pretending they do not need anyone. We had tried that. It almost killed us. Literally, the older I get, the more I believe something I once misunderstood completely. Silence is not peace. It is delayed pain, the hard conversations, the uncomfortable questions, the moments when you refuse to accept easy answers. Those are the moments that save lives. I think about that Tuesday in November often. The phone, the toolbox, the messages, the photographs, the moment everything changed. Back then, I thought I was discovering the beginning of the story. I was wrong. I was discovering the middle. The breaking had started years earlier, in quiet fears, hidden shame, unspoken struggles, secrets that grew larger every time they remained unspoken. Sometimes a man breaks long before anyone notices, not because the breaking is invisible, because everyone becomes skilled at pretending. The person who is suffering pretends they are fine. The people who love them pretend they believe it. And together, they create a silence dangerous enough to swallow an entire family. I wish I had been braver sooner. I wish I had asked harder questions. I wish I had pushed past the easy answers. But regret is not where the story ends, because there is another truth I have learned. You cannot save someone who refuses help, but you can refuse to participate in their silence. You can refuse to accept I am fine when everything in front of you says otherwise. You can love someone and still demand honesty. You can forgive someone and still hold them accountable. Those things are not opposites. You can stay without abandoning yourself. Love is not blindness. Love is vision. Real love sees everything. The beautiful parts, the broken parts, the admirable parts, the frightening parts, and chooses truth anyway. Not because truth is comfortable, because truth is the only place healing can begin. Robert still struggles with depression. Maybe he always will. But now he talks about it. He asks for help. He reaches out. He tells the truth. And every time he does, he wins a battle that once seemed impossible. As for me, I am still learning too. Still growing. Still choosing honesty over comfort. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And that has made all the difference. The greatest lesson this experience taught me is simple. People do not need perfection. They need connection. They need honesty. They need someone willing to see them clearly, not the version they present to the world, the real version, the struggling version, the scared version, the human version, because broken people do not need judgment first. They need truth. They need accountability. They need help. And sometimes they simply need someone brave enough to notice. Across the room, Lily was helping Sophie's daughter blow out imaginary candles on a toy cake. James was laughing at something Robert had said. Ordinary, simple, beautiful, the kind of moment I once would have overlooked. The kind of moment I now understood was everything. That is the life we are building now. Not a perfect life. An honest one, and after everything we have survived, I have learned that honesty is worth far more than the illusion of perfection ever was. If this story stayed with you, leave a word in the comments that captures what you are feeling right now. Maybe it is healing. Maybe it is forgiveness. Maybe it is honesty. Maybe it is hope. I read every comment, and I would love to hear your thoughts. And if there is someone in your life who always says, I am fine, even when you know they are not, reach out to them. Sometimes a conversation cannot solve a problem, but sometimes it can save a life. If stories about family, resilience, sacrifice, healing, and second chances resonate with you, please subscribe and join our Cora Stories family. Every week we share powerful stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Stories that remind us we are never as alone as we think we are. Not every family survives what happened to ours. The next family almost did not survive either. In the next story, a mother faces a different kind of breaking. When her teenage son is diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, she works 3 jobs, sacrifices everything, and pushes herself beyond every limit just to keep him alive. It is a story about love, exhaustion, survival, and the lengths a parent will go for their child. Click the story on your screen now. I will see you there.
Thank you for spending this time with Cora Stories Live. Wherever you listened from tonight, whether near or far, in the morning light, in the quiet afternoon, or deep into the stillness of night, I'm grateful you were here. Your support means more than words can say. Until the next story, rest well, stay strong, and keep believing in second chances. Good night.